Okay. All right. So you have us, we're now streaming. Is that correct? Can't hear you, Jimmy.
I showed it streaming.
I just started the stream.
Okay. All right. I think we're good to go then. All right. We'll call the meeting to order. So this is a very quickly noticed special meeting of the Minerals Business Economic Development
Yeah, thank you.
Committee. Purpose of this meeting, as directed by the Management Council of Wyoming Legislature, is to consider a bill draft regarding business relief programs surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a chairman's draft that Chairman Anderson and I have tried to put together to structure our discussion today. That working draft should be 0.16. It's posted on the website. As in following our rules under these unique circumstances with a virtual meeting, it was posted, it was left open on the LSO website, and we do have somewhere around 12 or 13 people who have signed up to participate and comment in this meeting, and we'll work through that process. Again, we started a couple minutes late because we thought it was important to make sure we had the YouTube stream going live. So why don't we, again, we'll open up this meeting. We'll start with a roll call and then move from there.
Senator Biden.
Here.
Senator Coe.
He's excused.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Wasserberger.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Crank.
Here.
Representative Duncan.
Here.
Representative Air.
Here.
Representative Furphy.
Here.
Representative Henderson.
Here.
Representative Laux.
Here.
Representative McGuire.
Participating.
Chairman Anderson.
Here.
Chairman Greer.
Here.
Quorum present, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fuller. So committee, a couple of us, Senator Rothfuss and I in particular, got a lot of experience with Management Council. As we move forward with this today, what works the very best, and it works for the people watching.
I'll have Brian call you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Hank's having trouble getting in. I couldn't help him. Could Brian or somebody call him and help him get on? He's got 2 or 3 links that aren't working.
Okay. I think we can get Mr. Schaub to get with him and help him out.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that'd be great. We'll get Senator Anderson here, or excuse me, Senator Coe, as soon as we can. So one of the things we've found that works very well is if you have a question, is to just simply raise your hand. I can see the way I've got my screen set up. I can see all of you very well. So just raise your hand. I'll call on you. When we vote, it's the same way. Is we'll vote with a raised hand, and then we've also been asked that we vote in the negative, being so we all vote aye, we raise our hand, and then those that voted no raise their hand. Again, this is just helping the folks that are out there watching our meeting understand how we're all voting, and just a couple things we've learned with our practice with Management Council. Okay, if there's no questions of the committee, how I wish to proceed today is I'm going to ask Mr. Fuller to go through a working draft, and it is just that, a working draft to give us structure as we move forward. Then we'll hear from the governor's office. I think Rennie McKay and Rob Krieger will be speaking for the governor's office. And then we'll hear from who we have affectionately called the 2 Joshes from the Wyoming Business Council, the new executive director, Josh Durrell, and then Josh Keefe, who oversees a lot of their loan programs. And then I think after that, we'll take public testimony, and our state auditor, Christy Racinas, has asked to speak, and we'll give her the courtesy of speaking first. So before we start in with Brian reading the bill, just a couple of things for everyone, our committee, everyone that's listening, everyone that wishes to participate. The need to get something done quickly with the CARES Act funds with respect to helping our small businesses was paramount. And it had been discussed through the Management Council bills, but with the bills that the Management Council is considering, it just didn't quite fit in. And so what was asked of this committee, because this is within our wheelhouse, is that we take this, and I'm going to say in an expedited manner, but not in a truncated manner. We're going to work this, we're going to get testimony, and we'll come back Monday and work it again, hopefully with a good product that we can hand over to LSO, who can have that ready for the special session if that happens to take place on the 15th. So again, an expedited process, but by no means truncated. We need to do this correctly. This is the first step, and we have to keep this in mind. This is the very first step. The concepts in this bill are quick grants to small businesses that have fallen between the cracks with the PPP dollars. The second is a larger bucket of funds, which will be doled out's a bad term, will be granted in the form of a loan, but a grant component to it, much like the PPP was. So we call those a loan grant is, I think, the term I've seen people utilize. It's a good way to look at it. And then the third component is to help larger businesses, mining industry, grocery stores, as Senator Rothfuss had kind of reminded me the other day, to deal with the direct costs associated with keeping their workers and employees safe. There are going to be other discussions. There will be other discussions in front of this committee concerning the issues with the mining industry, with oil and gas. What do we do with large manufacturers? Those are things we'll be discussing. Senator Anderson and I have laid out in our regular interim meeting, which has been moved to June 1st and 2nd. So just keep all that in mind. Work hard to discuss the policy points. My only ask is I hope we can get a good product that'll go by the full legislature, just like most of the work that this committee has in the past, and help the people of Wyoming. So with that, Mr. Fuller, would you walk us through the bill? Committee members, if you have questions, just a second, Representative Burkhart, so that works great. I just ask questions. I don't want to get into debating the bill just yet. We'll do that when we work that. So Representative Burkhart, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on that. Do you want to let Mr. Fuller go through the bill mostly before we get into any detail on questions? I'd only ask clarifying questions at this time.
Yeah, so yes, Representative Burkhart, if you just have a question on what something means, or just go ahead and ask those questions. As you said, clarifying questions, great. Just try not to debate it this first time through. Just take the public testimony, take your notes, and then when we work the bill, we can debate the issues. So
Understood.
Is that good? Everybody, thumbs up? Okay, got a couple thumbs up. All right, Mr. Fuller, please walk us through the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you should have 20 LSO 706 version 0.6 COVID-19 business relief programs. And this bill creates 3 programs, as Chairman Greer described, where funds would be distributed to Wyoming small businesses and businesses that have been adversely impacted by business interruptions due to required closures and due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll start briefly with the staff comments just to highlight that the programs in the bill draft may implicate provisions of the Wyoming Constitution, Article 3, Section 36, which prohibits appropriations to be made for charitable, industrial, educational, or benevolent purposes to any person, corporation, or community not under the state's absolute control. And then Article 16, Section 6, which prohibits the state from loaning or giving its credit or making donations to or in aid of any individual, association, or corporation, except in necessary support of the poor. In addition, all appropriations must be made for a public purpose. With that, I'll move into the text of the bill. Beginning on page 3, our section 1 is legislative findings. Some of these findings are similar to those that are in other bills of Management Council, so I'll walk through these a little more quickly. Paragraph 1 just describes the outbreak of COVID-19. Paragraph 2 describes how the President of the United States and the Governor of the state of Wyoming declared emergencies in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. Paragraph 3 provides that the governor, the state health officer, and others responded with swift measures to contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect Wyoming residents and citizens. Paragraph 4 on page 4, line 4, notes that among other actions taken, there were orders that were issued that limited public gatherings to 10 or less people, and also required businesses to close or severely curtail their operations during the effect of those orders. Paragraph 5 on line 11 notes that the crisis and the required closures have caused Wyoming businesses to experience an unprecedented and unforeseen loss of revenue and income, making it unclear whether they can recover and continue contributing to Wyoming's economy. Paragraph 6 on line 18 notes that the businesses that have been affected also help provide critical products, supplies, and services to Wyoming residents and industries. Paragraph 7 on page 5, line 1, notes that recovery requires a dedicated response from government. On line 9, notes that the CARES Act, the federal CARES Act, provides state relief funds in the amount of $1.25 billion for use in response to this pandemic. On line 19, notes that due to these extraordinary circumstances, joint legislative and executive action will result in the greatest benefit to the state. Moving to page 6, paragraph 10 notes that, among other things, payments to state and local programs to support Wyoming businesses and economic development projects are a priority need. They require funding from these and any future federal stimulus funds. Subsection B, beginning on line 7, notes that to address the harms that Wyoming businesses have experienced as a result of the public health crisis, and to ensure the availability of an adequate supply of goods and services to Wyoming residents and industries, the legislature finds that the state has an obligation to use a portion of those CARES Act funds to ensure that Wyoming businesses can remain open and contribute to Wyoming's economy. Section 2 is the first program that's created by this act, entitled the Wyoming Business Interruption Stipend Program. And broadly, the purpose of this program is to reimburse eligible businesses for the cost of business interruptions that occurred because of required closures. Subsection A are definitions, and I'll start with paragraph 2. Eligible business sets the parameters of the businesses that would be eligible for funding under this program. So beginning on page 7, line 2, the business had to have been established on or before the date of the enactment of any order that established required closures. It has to be independently owned and operated. It has to be.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Furphy.
Yes, I am concerned about what independently owned means.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Furphy, that was included, that was based on existing language that's used in the definition of the Small Business Investment Credit Program. It's used that broadly. So really independently owned would just mean, be the plain meaning of that it has to be independent. I'm not sure there's.
So Mr. Fuller, I'll help you out. Representative Furphy, we will have the executive director and then the program director from the Business Council testify. Why don't we write that down and ask them how that's interpreted in those programs? Is that okay?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, beginning on line 9, the business has to be headquartered in Wyoming or have its principal operations located in Wyoming. It's limited to businesses with 50 employees or less. And then as of the date that the business files an application with the Business Council, that business has not received funding from the Paycheck Protection Program that was part of the CARES Act, or any other CARES Act program, or any funding from federal sources that were provided in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on to page 8, line 1, this defines required closure as it's used in this section to mean the closure of a business that was ordered by the state or any local government of Wyoming in an order that was issued in or on effect beginning with March 15th, 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then it also includes the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any of those closures. Page 8, line 9 begins the substantive discussion of the program. So it creates this program, the Business Interruption Stipend Program. It requires a business council to establish and administer it, and then provides parameters for the stipends that can be issued under the program. First, a business has to submit an application to the Business Council, which then reviews and approves it. As part of the application, the applicant business has to certify that it is an eligible business as defined in this section, and acknowledge that knowingly making a false statement is prohibited and could result in the requirement that that business has to repay any funds received if it turns out that it is not an eligible business and they knowingly made a false statement on that application. Moving to page 9, line 4. The eligible business must also certify that it has incurred actual losses as a result of required closures or business interruptions from those required closures. Line 9, paragraph 3, the stipends are a base amount of $15,000 plus an additional $1,000 for every employee that the business employed on March 15th. And there's a maximum of $50,000 that's available per business under this program. Paragraph 4 provides that stipends under this program can only be made from federal CARES Act funds, and no state funds of any kind or from any source can be used for paying out these stipends. Moving to page 10, subsection C provides rulemaking authority for the Business Council, and it also notes that they can promulgate emergency rules to administer the program as necessary. Subsection D requires the Attorney General to review in writing the legality of this program and any rules that the Business Council promulgates for the program. Subsection E just provides that no expenditure of funds can be made under this section except in accordance with state and federal law. And subsection F requires the Business Council to conduct random audits of stipend recipients under the section to ensure that those funds are expended in compliance with state and federal law. And then page 10, line 18 is the appropriation for this program. It provides $25 million from CARES Act funding or any other federal funds that may be available for this purpose. And then page 11, line 12, states that this program terminates on December 31st, 2020. Section 3 is the second program, the Coronavirus Business Relief Loan Program. And broadly, the purpose of this program is to provide loans to eligible businesses adversely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic or by required closures. Again, this section starts with definitions, and the definition for eligible business beginning on page 11, line 20, and then moving on to page 12 is slightly different. So it still has to be established on or before the date of the closures, still has to be independently owned and operated and headquartered in Wyoming, but the number of employees changes to 100. So it would be 100 employees or less for this business. And then there's no language in this section regarding the receipt of prior funding or lack thereof as an eligibility factor for businesses under this program. Moving on to page 12, line 13, this defines financial institution pretty broadly to basically capture any institution that's authorized to do business and make loans in the state of Wyoming. Line 20 defines a non-recourse loan to just mean a loan for which the only recourse available in the event of default is the collateral that was provided for the loan. Page 13, required closure is the same definition as in the previous program. And then page 13, line 9, establishes the substance of the program. The business council, again, establishes and administers the program for the purpose of providing loans. And then the parameters of this program follow. Page 13, line 17, again, it's similar language in terms of filing an application and certifying that it's an eligible business, and then the same potential penalty for knowingly making a false statement. On page 14, line 4, the business council can authorize financial institutions to serve as eligible lenders for the program, and those institutions can use their own forms and systems so long as any form that they use include the certifications that are required in paragraph 1 and elsewhere in this section. Page 14, line 12 provides that the loans that are issued are non-recourse loans, and they're made under terms and conditions prescribed by the business council, subject to the following. First, that the interest rate is 1% for any loan made under this section, and the interest is paid annually and is retained by the lender or the council if the council makes loans directly as a fee, as an administration fee for the loan. Moving on to the top of page 15, line 1, for loans under this section, the council has to provide necessary funds to the financial institutions for disbursement to eligible businesses that apply for the loans. And then in the event of default, the interests of the council and the lender have priority over the claim of the business receiving the financing or any other third party.
So just a second. Senator Coe, thank you for joining us. How are you today? We'll get you to take you off mute and just check out your sound quality and everything for us. You're still on mute, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, it took them about 12 minutes to get online, so there we go. I was going to say it might take them a minute to unmute.
Wait, but yeah, okay, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Coe, good afternoon. How are you today?
Good afternoon. Good to be here finally. I've been here
Okay.
all along.
We're partway through, so all right. Thank you. I'm glad you could join us. All right, go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll begin on page 15, line 13. This provides that the business council determines the type and adequacy of the collateral of the loan. Then paragraph 5, line 16, before receiving a loan and making a loan, the eligible business must demonstrate to the business council's satisfaction the actual losses that the eligible business has incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic or as a result of business interruptions due to required closures. Page 16, line 1, loans are limited to $100,000 for each eligible business. Paragraph 7, loans can be made only with funds from the CARES Act, and no state funds from any kind or any source can be used for these loans. Line 11, page 16, loans have a 10-year term. No principal payments are due for the first 2 years, and then the business council is required to issue a credit against any remaining principal for any and all state taxes that the eligible business pays during the term of the loan. And then the staff comment at the bottom just noted where the chairman invite discussion regarding whether some percentage of payroll that the business pays during the term of the loan, whether that should qualify for a credit against principal or not.
So Brian, I do have one question is, a lot of this will be governed by rule by the business council. Hopefully be relatively flexible, but that would be those credits would be applied at any given time. Is that worded that way, or are you talking at the end of the loan?
Mr. Chairman, the way the way that sentence is structured is quite broad. There's no limit on when the credit against that principal is applied during the term of the loan. It just specifies that for any taxes paid during that term of the loan, credit must be given against the principal.
Okay, thanks.
Moving on to page 17, lines 2 through 14 repeat the same provisions that were in section 2 for the first program. So rulemaking authority, attorney general review, the expenditures must comply with state and federal law, and then the requirement for random audits of loans that are dispersed under this program. Page 17, line 19 provides that no loans can be issued after December 30th, 2020. And then beginning on line 22 is the appropriation, which is $175 million from CARES Act fund or other available federal funding for the program. Mr. Chairman, section 4 begins on page 18, line 16. This is the coronavirus mitigation stipend program. Broadly, the purpose of this program is to reimburse eligible businesses that are adversely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically for COVID-related expenses. So the definitions first on line 22 defines what COVID-related expenses are. It's a fairly broad definition, but it has to be actual expenses that are incurred in Wyoming for the health and safety of Wyoming workers. It includes, among other things, cleaning products, personal protection equipment, safety equipment, training expenses, expenses associated with hiring staff to conduct extra cleaning or screenings, for example, or sanitizing. Page 19, line 10 defines eligible business, and here the only requirement is that the business be established on or before the date of enactment of any order requiring closures of businesses in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Page 19, line 16 begins the substance of the program. Again, the Business Council establishes and administers it for providing stipends for COVID-related expenses to businesses. Stipends under this section have some requirements similarly, and these begin on page 20. First, just like the other two programs, must be an application and approval by the Business Council and a certification that the business is an eligible business. The stipends can be made, this is page 20, line 11, can be made only to reimburse COVID-related expenses as defined in this section that an eligible business actually incurred between March 1st, 2020 and December 1st, 2020. The stipends are conditioned on the eligible business demonstrating to the Business Council's satisfaction that it has incurred those COVID-related expenses that are reimbursable by the stipend as provided in this section. The stipends are up to $200,000. Moving on to page 21, they can be made only with funds provided to the state from the CARES Act. No state funds can be used. And then page 21, line 6 repeats those same provisions as the previous two programs in terms of rulemaking, AG review, the random audits, and compliance with state and federal law. On page 22, $25 million is appropriated from the CARES Act funds for the purpose of this program, and the program terminates on December 31st, 2020. And then, Mr. Chairman, the effective date is immediate.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Committee, any general questions for Mr. Fuller? Any clarification needed as we move forward? Representative Henderson and Representative Furphy.
Just a quick question on the loan part of it. Just clarification really to understand what the process is for those payments as they're made and where those dollars go.
Good. Mr. Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, are you referring to, say, payments of principal or? Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that's not contemplated in the bill draft itself. That would be something that presumably would be covered through rulemaking. You know, I think the question would be the effect of the credits vis-a-vis the repayment of that principal.
So Representative Henderson, the goal would be is that the business continues, pays taxes, pays employees, and to the tune that they do not have to pay the funds back, that they receive enough credit over the 10-year life of the loan. That would be the goal. Okay. Representative Furphy, I think your hand up was up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I just want to clarify for the banks, all they get out of this whole process is a 1% fee one time, but they have to administer the loan and they're taking the risk involved? Is that correct?
So Representative Furphy, one is this is an outline. I want to stress this. This is an outline of 3 programs. But the fact of the matter is it says specifically that the business council will give them the funds. The business council, the state of Wyoming is assuming the risk of it. The question will be is whether or not the 1% fee is sufficient for the banks or the credit unions to handle the administration. I think we'll have some discussion on that. We may have to tweak some of that wording, whether we allow them to lend the funds or just simply administer the program. So there'll be some debate there, I think.
Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that point specifically, it was my impression the way we have it drafted right now, it's not just a one-time 1%, but that the interest from the loan would be retained by the lender. So I believe it would be 1% ongoing of the outstanding portion of the loan. So slightly better than 1%. But again, I think we need to talk about it more. But as drafted, page 14, lines 17 through 22.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Okay. Yeah, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, the total of this, the 3 tranches, according to my math, is about 225 million out of the 1.25 billion. How come? Where's the other money going, and how come? How did they come about these figures to give to these businesses? Why isn't it more? I guess is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer that. Just having participated in the business council, or excuse me, management council meetings, is these are just identified needs. A little bit on the first 25 million for the grants was kind of fleshed out to how many businesses fell through the cracks. It's not going to be accurate. It's a guess. The rest of the funds, though, have a broad, what do I want to say? The definition as it came from the federal government cover a lot more. Healthcare, locals. There will be a lot of other businesses that aren't covered by this. I think that we'll find as we go through it. This committee can move those numbers up or down. The one thing I will point out that I think is that it's important, in my view, that the legislature establish some programs to get these programs in place. The governor will have the ability, especially in light of the management council bills, to be 11 more funds into these programs if they are successful and if more funds are needed, or to flex funds between the 3 programs within this. A little bit of it is we don't know what we don't know right now. So I think it's important that we get a good program stood up. A lot of the numbers in here are up for us to decide what makes the most sense. Okay. Any other questions? I think if there isn't, what we'll do, we've got scheduled representatives from the executive, from the governor's office. If we could admit them in to the meeting, we'll get their comments and you guys will be free to ask them questions like someone that's already come up. So, okay, there we go. All right, Mr. McKay is, and then Mr. Krieger, perfect. Okay, and then we've got the business council. Okay, Executive Director Durrell. So let's do this as close as we can to a regular meeting, and this start with the governor's office, Mr. McKay and Mr. Krieger, and this will get your input. Go ahead and just run it just kind of like a regular meeting.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Rennie McKay, Governor Mark Gordon's policy director, and very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and all the members of the Minerals Committee here this afternoon. So thank you for making this all possible and working so quickly to deal with this. We're obviously in a situation where things move very fast as we try to respond to everything that's happening with COVID. So I would call it unprecedented, the territory we're in today. And, it's been 100 years since we've had a pandemic and a virus spread across the globe like we're dealing with right now. And also we're seeing economic impacts that are happening globally and locally, and they're immense. So I really appreciate your work. Obviously, in the governor's office, we're very focused on protecting lives and dealing with public health as well. That is very, very crucial. But the reason we're here today is we're also keeping on our mind how we protect livelihoods and what we do with that together. So appreciate that discussion and know it's compartmentalized while we're also dealing with a lot of the other responses around public health and safety. We have already seen substantial dollars, as you said, Mr. Chairman, go out in Wyoming to businesses and companies here via the loans through the Paycheck Protection Program. And I think that the demand for that shows the scale of need in Wyoming and truthfully nationally. It's all necessary to respond to help those small businesses stay afloat and survive this economic, what I'd call a disaster and devastation. So we appreciate that. Given the resources that are also available to us via the CARES Act, we can do more and we can do it quickly. And so thanks to the legislation you're looking at, I think we've got a good option for where we move next. There should be no questions, I think, in anyone's mind that there are economic impacts that came from the pandemic generally. And then there are also those that came from the restrictions in the health orders. So prioritizing those businesses impacted by the restrictions in the health orders is a real positive step that we think allows us to protect lives and the public health while keeping businesses going. The governor knows there's also a very significant responsibility to use the CARES Act money wisely, and a top priority is the relief for businesses of how we use the CARES Act dollars. Other top priorities, again, are emergency responses, our health preparedness as we go forward, employee and worker relief efforts, food sustainability is another one. All of these we do feel like are being addressed now or being addressed through other bills that the Management Council has considered. So the bill you have in front of you today, we think lays out the right concept to provide us some essential business relief. So thanks to both chairmen for the work you've done in putting this together. Thanks to the LSO staff for all their work. And joining me today is Rob Krieger from our office. He's the policy advisor for economic development. And also we've got Josh Durrell, the CEO of the Business Council. I pass on my thanks to them as well as to Auditor Racinas, who chairs the Governor's Business Task Force and has chaired that through this crisis response. All of them will be giving you a lot more detail about what they've been hearing from the private sector over the last couple of months and how that input from the business community from around the state has shaped the governor's approach. You already incorporated many of those concepts into this bill. And so we look forward to taking some questions from all of you, helping as we can over the next few days to finalize this legislation so we can all act quickly and get money out to those businesses that need it most. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McKay. Representative Ayer, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Rennie, could you give us some idea of the number of businesses that have taken advantage of the PPP program and the total volume and loans or grants that they've been given?
Sure. And Mr. Chairman, I know Rob Krieger has all that detail already prepared in his testimony. So if you want him to just roll through that overview of the work that we've already done with the SBA, that may help.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead then, Mr. Krieger, if you would help us out. If you can answer Representative Ayer's question, or we'll let you just start with your planned testimony and then answer Representative Ayer's question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Rob Krieger, Business and Economic Advisor to Governor Gordon. As the governor laid out last week in his presentation to Management Council, in Wyoming, we have over 20,000 employers that employ less than 100 people. This amounts to over 200,000 jobs in the state, $3.3 billion in wages, and an estimated $370 million in sales tax every year. I believe the concept of this bill will have a direct and positive impact on these employers. To the representative's question, the Small Business Administration has provided some critical immediate assistance to these businesses in these first couple months. Over 7,600 loans were made in the first 10 days of the SBA's Paycheck Protection program just here in Wyoming. You know, this, as I said, this program has served its purpose. It's provided relief in the first weeks of this crisis. And I think now we need to look to the next phase for Wyoming businesses, and this bill does that. The unfortunate truth is we don't know how long COVID will be with us here in Wyoming, and I think providing a vehicle to assist Wyoming businesses could be crucial in the coming months. You know, while this virus has touched every sector of our economy and every size of business, I think the concept laid out in this bill could provide much needed help to our Main Street businesses, which are vital to our state's character. We don't have big cities, as you guys know. You know, Wyoming's made up of main streets, and that's what makes the state so great. I do want to note for a minute that, you know, from the minute this virus stepped foot in Wyoming, the governor has been in constant communication with businesses from all corners of the state. The need for a hand up during this unprecedented time is most certainly there. And I want to thank the chairman and the committee for bringing this concept forward for consideration. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Representative Ayer, did you get your question answered? I think Don Richards had sent out an email to all the legislature a little bit ago with those exact numbers. Somewhere over $1 billion has been paid out with an average of about 87,000 per loan. I can't think of the number of loans on the PP Paycheck Protection Plan. So there is a little more detail that I think we got last night. So, okay. Mr. Krieger, what other feedback are you getting? I mean, this draft was put together, you know, it's kind of a tool that Chairman Anderson and I've used as a chairman's draft to just help guide the discussion. And in moving in this expedited fashion, I think it helps. What feedback are you getting? What areas of concern should the committee be looking at as we work it from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a good question. In the first round of the PPP program, I worked very closely with our local SBA office. And in the first round, there's a lot of questions about who was eligible, right? There's questions within our ag community, sole proprietors, those sort of people that they're wondering if they were or not and weren't certain, so therefore they may have not applied. SBA cleared that up in the second round, and I think those folks have now started to receive some of that assistance if they've applied. One thing I've been hearing a lot recently is, you know, this did help right now, but they're worried, you know, this helps for 8 weeks, and, you know, here soon that'll run out, and what do we do then? Because I think, as you guys know, the impacts of this virus and the economic impacts, it's not going to be, unfortunately, a light switch and things be back to normal. So I think that's a concern businesses are having, and I think this bill helps that.
Okay, ready? So I think that may transition us over to the Business Council, because the real, some of the real question is what the administrative burden of getting this out. And I know the very first thing that Chairman Anderson said is Greer, this better not be a bunch of BS. They better be able to get it quickly. Or something, maybe it was said a little differently than that. I'm not sure, but. So, okay. Yeah, this good, Director Durrell, if you don't mind, your comments and your thoughts on administration.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Josh Durrell, CEO of the Business Council. I also have with me Josh Keefe, who has worked with the finance portion of these types of things in the past on a smaller scale. I think you know, one of the things that of course comes up first is I think Senator Brightman had a really good point. Is this enough? That's a big question for us. I think that the businesses around Wyoming are definitely in need of a bridge, and I hopefully that was very clear from Mr. Krieger and Mr. McKay's remarks, as well as the tenor of this particular draft bill. We at the Business Council, we are a little bit concerned about the resources required to make this happen. I think especially in the second tranche of funding and how that will go down. I think the logistics of that are challenging. And while we do have experience with both, the first tranche and the second tranche as a course of our business, those are still the big numbers. And we know that there are many companies that need the help. And while on one hand, we are nervous about that and we want to be prepared, we realize that it'll take some resources that we may not have. And again, I think Josh Keefe can shed some light on that as well. But we're also sensitive to the fact that the pain that we feel as an organization to do that pales in comparison to what these businesses are feeling out there today. And so putting ourselves in their shoes and realizing that they're in a much different position and devastated in some ways by this whole crisis, we want to shoulder the load and we want to be able to do that. It may require us to bring on some temporary additional staff. It may require us to look at other agencies to bring that in. We also should look carefully at all of the mechanisms that are possible, especially for that second tranche, to make sure that the administration of it is simple and as your co-chair so eloquently put, simple. I think we'll keep it at that. And but we stand ready. We are looking at how we would do that. We've started to look at how we would lay the groundwork technologically as well as with personnel to be able to respond quickly. And with that, I think I would, Mr. Chairman, if you could pass things over to Josh Keefe to talk a little bit more about those specifics.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a question, but before I get to the question, I just want to let you and the committee know that Senators Wasserberger, Coe, and I need to pop off for a little while to another meeting related to the special session that's coming up on the Senate side. So if we vanish, that's the reason that we're vanishing for a while, and we'll return when we're available again in a little bit.
Senator Rothfuss, do you know how long that might be?
My hope is an hour, but legislative meetings.
Yes, I do. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll continue with testimony and hopefully we take good notes. We will not work the bill till you guys get back.
Thank you.
We got to take an extended break. Okay.
Appreciate that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as far as a question to Josh, I appreciate how challenging this is going to be to roll out. But one of the concerns that I have with the rollout of any programs that we do of this type is that they happen very quickly. If we end up bureaucratic, if we end up having a requirement for rules and details and going back and forth on drafts of applications, then we'll be able to delay things in a way that will really preclude the utility of these programs that we want to get out. So I just briefly, before we go to the other Josh, want to hear your thoughts on how quickly we can get a program, regardless of which ones we move forward and what the details are, out to the business community that needs it.
Thank you, Senator. And if I may, that's indeed a good question. And I do think Josh probably has a better handle on the exact logistics on it. Mr. Keefe does. But we again, as I mentioned, we're preparing now to get the things in place to roll this out. And the simplification, especially in the first tranche, the first part of that program, we are looking to make it very, very simple in terms of application, as well as in the approval process. And of course, the businesses will certify that they're upholding their end of the bargain and that they truly were affected and all of the standards that we are going to set forth. But the other remaining pieces of that, and again, Josh has some experience with this, is in the actual logistics of funding and making sure that can get done. So with that, I think that Mr. Keefe would probably have a better answer for you.
Yeah, Mr. Keefe.
Thank you, Chairman Greer. Senator Rothfuss, in regards to your question about the speed of this, one of the challenges is it's going to be, I'm not worried so much about the business council side of things, but you're right, there are some steps that have to be performed in other offices and other state agencies that we have to talk to them and make sure that they're aware that this is coming. Because, for example, any kind of vendor management that happens as a state approved vendor has to go through the state auditor's office. In regards to specifically the grant piece of this, as Josh briefly touched on, I've already developed kind of a preliminary application. We've been working to make sure that the SBA, that we don't encounter the same problem that the SBA did in the second tranche where it crashed the site. And so we're trying to make sure that we have the capabilities to handle that sudden influx of traffic that the website's going to see. Because the goal is to use e-signatures, and also there's a lot of backroom work happening to keep track of all of this. So I don't know if I have a definitive timeline for you, but I think we are prepared to go as fast as we can. I will give you a little point of reference. When the canal collapse happened earlier this year in Goshen County, I was able to close, granted, I know it's much smaller scale, but we were able to close all of those 38 loans within 45 days of Goshen County and get all of those farmers the help that they needed. So we also have a lot of experience at the Business Council handling federal grants. For those that know about ARA money, we have folks who have experience in being able to comply with federal regulations and also know how to capture that information and get it out quickly to communities, as happened with that in the past. So.
Yep. Representative Duncan had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Either Josh, question goes out to either one of you. Are you familiar with Goshen County and their program that they did with their tax? And they immediately sent out microgrants to our entire business district within weeks. So my question is, have you reached out to them? They've already done this. And so my question is, have you already reached out to them? They already have an application. They already have done this program. And my hope is that you would be able to reproduce this at the state level where it comes into you, and then you go out and use your local people on the ground so that we don't have this tie up of red tape and waiting for different agencies and things like that, that it immediately goes out to the people. So my question, have you reached out to any of them?
Okay. Either whoever wants to tackle that.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Representative Duncan. And no, we have not reached out to them, although I think that's a really good idea. I know that they were one of the few places in the state that were able to do that type of a program. And so that's a fantastic point. Thank you.
So I think I'll get you in just a second, Senator. Josh Keefe has worked up a one-page, for the first part for the grant program, a one-page application, which should be able to move very smoothly. One of the issues we have, and it's an issue we're going to have regardless, is being a state-approved vendor. And our current auditor has done a wonderful job of streamlining that process, but that will be a point that we have to deal with almost regardless of what we do. So, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll piggyback off of what Representative Duncan was alluding to as far as the efficiency of rolling this out. Have you thought anything about replicating what the PPP has done, so we could do basically a state version of the PPP to avoid recreating the wheel, so to speak, on how we're going to roll this out? Because I imagine the tidal wave of applications is going to swamp you guys. And I'm worried about you being able to administratively handle what's coming your way. So anything, and your thoughts on going to a grant only process and foregoing the loan portion of this, because I think the loan portion is going to be what ties this thing up. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Senator Brightman. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let Josh Keefe handle the first part of your question about that process, but then in terms of grant only, that is definitely something that would limit the amount of work. I think that as Josh mentioned, with the loans, the disaster loans for Goshen County, those were all loans, and that takes a lot more administration. It takes a lot more handling and handoffs and things like that, and probably a bit more red tape than those grants. And so, I think that we're open to that. We would prefer something that, again, is as simple as possible and works to get money in the hands of those businesses that have been affected. I think, Josh, you want to touch on the PPP portion, but I know that is something that he is very familiar with, and modeled the application process after that as much as possible.
Yes, Chairman Greer, Senator Brightman, that's exactly what I did. I have been on both sides of the PPP program with our own small business, received that relief earlier. And so I've seen it from the borrower side and also from the administrative side, and have a very close relationship with Amy Lee, who's the regional director for the SBA. And so I took that exact same application, and it's even, as Chairman Greer alluded to, it's literally one page, and created an application that will automatically calculate all of the numbers for you, which is even a step further than the PPP application was. So I think that, yes, that has been taken into consideration and even improved upon, I would say.
Okay. So Representative Furphy had a question regarding the independent, I forget what it was, independent owned business, what that meant in the context of other programs. Is that right, Representative?
Yes, that's correct.
I think Mr. Keefe could probably help us with that definition.
Yes, Chairman Greer, Representative Furphy, I interpret that independently owned and operated, meaning, a business who, I would say, acts on their own, somebody who makes the decision for their own business. They aren't reliant upon, somebody with public input or outside input from their business. So I would treat that as, any business that, I don't know what other word to use than independent, but, somebody that makes their own decisions for their own company. So.
Well, the basis of my question is, could you then have a partnership? And could you be a small sub-S corporation with limited number of people who are owners? So I'm just confused about independently. We probably need to define that more thoroughly.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crank had a question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Representative Crank. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Either one of the Josh, I'm looking at the section 4 on the mitigation stipend program and the timing. Would that cause any problems in that on page 20, actual expenses actually incurred to December 1st, spent by the 31st? So how do I get my application in, and how do I get everything timed up so I don't trip over? And I didn't get anything for November or whatnot. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Josh.
Yes, that does make sense. So, I guess my goal would be as long as we receive that and we're able to encumber those funds before the sunset date, that we could, even if, for example, you turned it in on December 29th, I would encumber those funds immediately so that we would have them on hand before whatever was left reverted back to the Fed, the Treasury Department.
Thank you.
So Representative Crank, in one of the first drafts of this, that date was the sunset date of the CARES Act. The problem we had, the reason why we moved it to December 1 was just that so you could submit those and there was time to pay the funds. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other, yeah, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to go back to the topic of being able to have the resources to administer and manage the program. I wondered, from the perspective of either Josh, how do you see that unfolding? I know you kind of touched on it briefly, but to me, it's no good having these dollars available if you don't have the resources to administer and manage it. So I'd be willing to. I want to hear your view on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And again, great question. And it is something that does concern us. We're looking at utilizing as much technology as possible to put them into a queue, to be able to review them quickly, and to be able to ensure that the application is completed. And then again, I think the next piece is that handoff with, where the checks are cut essentially, and then that vendor management system. So I personally don't have experience with that portion of it, and I would lean on Mr. Keefe to fill that in. But that's a concern for us, and we're looking at and working with other agencies perhaps to get some resources, utilize some of our regional directors as well to pull them in. So we too are concerned about the logistics of it and the resourcing. And we want to, we want to be as creative as possible in this and be as helpful as possible. But that's definitely a concern for us as well, sir.
Okay. I do have a more technical question, more for probably Josh Keefe, is the way this draft is presented. We talk in terms of having the banks make the loans. And so I know with PPP, we had issues with their lending capacities being stretched or taxed. Now, some of those loans should start to be forgiven as we move forward to help out with that. But is there a way where we can just have the banks administer the loan so it's not, and I just don't know the answer to that question. I think we've got Scott Myers set to testify, but we can ask him later.
Yeah, I think I guess one thing that I guess we'll have to try and figure out is administering the closing of the loan at the front end is, something totally different than servicing the loan as it's going on. And so I think that, if we can get help getting it closed, hopefully they would be willing to continue servicing it, but that is something that,
so
we're going to have to try.
Josh, so let's talk in terms of, because I'm familiar with the economic disaster loan. Okay, with those loans, what those loans do is provide liquidity with basically very little security. Okay, so they help the portfolio of any bank. I mean, any customer's file with that bank is helped by those loans, right? So is there maybe a way we can have the banks help promote, obtain the applications, but yet the loan come through the business council, and then have the banks start to help collect that data again, so we're not taxing their lending abilities? And can we do that efficiently?
I think that would be possible. I don't know how efficiently we could do it, but if, again, we're going to have all hands on deck at the business council trying to work these as quickly as possible. And so I think, I look at it from my experience as a banker before, where, that might be a little more appetizing to them, where if they don't have to be servicing the loan forever, but maybe just help us on the front end, get these closed and distributed out. That would, any help is a great help to the business council for sure.
So a little bit of my thought on that for the committee and the business council is the bankers are out there. They're going to help their customers. They're going to help their clients try to obtain these funds. And so we can just get that information put together, the application filled out, submitted, money distributed, we can work on the forgiveness part later. We've got more time to do that. That's just sort of my general thought.
Mr. Chairman,
So I have, I'm gonna go with the co-chair, then Representative Burkhart, then Furphy. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the grant avenue sure solves a lot of problems for us if we can ever make that work. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, I guess, for either Josh or maybe wait for the bankers to appear. Will these loans require the banks to provide pledging for the loans? That they have to back those loans with other securities if they loan for, say, mortgages or that? Or will this come directly from the state in a manner that they don't have to do that?
So it's kind of the discussion we're having, Representative Burkhart, is can we do that so it comes directly from the state and doesn't affect their lending capacity? I think that's what we have to look at. Yeah. So then I had Representative. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Representative Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I've talked to several bankers about this whole situation. They really are not interested in this program for a 1% interest rate, with especially the way it's written. It sounds like the banks may be taking the risk, and in the event of foreclosure, they've got to foreclose the loan. So the ones I've talked to, they're at capacity anyway with what they're doing right now. And so they're just not interested in this program. So I go along with Chairman Anderson. A grant program may make much more sense for us.
Okay, so I'm going to just comment on the grant program. Go ahead, Senator Anderson. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I talked to a couple of bankers here in my local area, and they're more than willing and able to move with this. However, they would appreciate the grant program more than the loan program. But if it's the loan program, they're gonna make it happen, and they did with the PPE also, or PPP. Thanks.
Senator Anderson, I'm glad to hear that, because I would believe that most banks, especially our local banks here in Washoe County, are going to do whatever they can do to help their customers move forward. I think that's probably the mentality of almost every banker in Wyoming, or at least I hope that is. Here's a problem, folks, and it's alluded to in the first part with the staff comments. Is we do have an issue, and one of the directions that we were given when we started to outline this program is dealing with the Wyoming Constitution. And so Article 16, Section 6 is an issue we have to consider. And that's where we are loaning or giving credit or making donations to individuals, associations, or corporations in the state of Wyoming. And so, I think with the first part of the grant program, the way it's worded, the way we went with the findings, we're saying, hey, as a result of government action, your business was closed down. You've got no other relief, and your business would otherwise go away. So we're doing a grant for that. On the tail end, the stipend for the larger businesses and a PPE, we're calling that a stipend or a grant, but that's to help them comply with a health order to keep the economy stable. This middle portion is a little more tenuous because we are now looking at loss of income type of issues with that. And so that's why this concept of a loan that can then be paid off by credit, because we can give credit for taxes, right? Is getting paid off in that fashion. So as a result of this, I don't think we have anything perfect, but I know there was a great deal of reluctance from leadership, primarily the Republican leadership. LSO advised to be careful with a full grant program. I agree, just be easier to give grants with conditions. I agree, but I think we have to keep this other issue in the back of our mind as we establish these programs. So, okay. If there's no other question, why don't we see this, keep the business council up and see if we can't bring in Auditor Racinas. And I don't know, it's like magic. I'm not running this stuff, so somebody else is. I just ask for it and it happens, I guess. And magically she appears. Auditor, welcome. You are on mute, so I can see that. If you would like to unmute, I think we all know you, but please introduce yourself and you will be the first commenter for our bill today.
Can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Madam Auditor, we can all hear you fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. As many of you know, I think there's one of our main service providers of internet is down today, so I've had to MacGyver my connection here, so I'll do my best. I'll try to be as quick as I can, and I have sort of two areas of testimony I want to touch on. One with my auditor hat on, and then the other with my task force hat on. First off, it's been, sorry, I didn't identify myself, Christy Racina, State Auditor. It's been brought up a couple of times that the auditor's office will be involved. Whenever we push money out to anyone, you have to become a vendor in the state's accounting system. And that process can be challenging and take a little bit of time for good reason to protect against fraud and whatnot. We, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, we've tweaked that process and sort of reassigned resources to make that process smoother. And we are ready to attack whatever program is put out. Will it be challenging? Perhaps, but right now, today, we have the ability to add about 150 vendors a day. Now, that is if that's with current resources. We can probably do some additional maneuvering in-house to maybe even up that further. Something interesting that has happened already, though, is, and the Director of Workforce Services may touch on this, but I'll touch on it briefly. They put out a small layoff aversion grant, which many of you have probably heard of. And you know, we needed to get something like 40 vendors on very quickly. It ended up being very, very challenging to get the information from the businesses. So the holdup was not so much with a state process or state bureaucracy. It was these businesses are often closed, and checking the proper boxes and getting the information that's needed and a completed W-9 that's filled out correctly the first time. That was really the bigger hurdle, but we're ready to deploy resources, and we're fairly confident that as quickly as the Business Council or whoever can go through an application, we can get those added on very quickly. So switching over a little bit to the business task force side. For a little bit of background, the task force was created about 6 weeks ago, and we have 35 or so people from a variety of industries around the state and representing different groups. And we've been really down in the weeds for that time, and living and breathing and sleeping the federal programs that have come out so far, and really delving into what's working well, what's not, and some of the unintended consequences, both good and bad, of some of those programs. So this bill so far is a wonderful step in the right direction. So I really, really appreciate all of your work on this. I know this is coming at us all very quickly. So I'm gonna try to talk quickly, but be thorough. So first off, I want to touch on there's quite a bit of concern of restricting any of these programs to businesses that did not access PPP money. And I want to talk a little bit about the PPP program. It was called the Paycheck Protection Program for a reason. It is very, very employee centric. And that's part of the reason it was so important and so successful as a mitigation tool. A minimum of 75% of whatever money you got has to go to your employees. And for many of our business, it was more than that. particularly with our small businesses, they may have only gotten, you know, $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000. So I think that a preference for businesses that didn't access PPP would be preferable, but an absolute restriction on entities that did get some PPP money, I've heard a lot of concerns with, and in my own learning curve about the PPP program, I can see how that is legitimate. The PPP money did not replace any revenue. It did not help the business per se. What the main thrust of that program was to keep people employed and keep money in the employees' pockets.
So auditor, to that point, and I do this because I see a lot of the committee nodding their head, is something that Idaho did with part of their program is I don't want to, I might get this a little wrong, but a preference for those. Let me back up. First of all, it was the governor's office asked for something to help those that fell through the cracks. So that's where that prohibition came on that first bucket. So, but in some of the feedback I've got and going along with what you're saying right now is maybe something like Idaho, where if somebody got less than $10,000 in PPP would still be eligible. And I think that is definitely something for our committee to consider. And again, I say this is an outline of 3 programs. We're here to work those today.
Yes.
And
Yep.
I think these are very valid points. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, perfect. Yes, and I can't overstate the importance and the impact that the PPP program has had. It's the best mitigation tool we've seen so far. But that being said, there's just there are in fact industries and businesses that it didn't work well for. And again, the timeline, even if you did get it and were able to utilize it, our businesses, that 8 weeks is ticking by a lot quicker than it seemed when you first got that money. So that was sort of my first point. The second point, I want to talk a little bit more about the loan program. And I know that there are robust conversations about the constitutionality of these programs. That I'm not an expert in that area. I'm not an attorney, and I know that you all will do your due diligence there. But my biggest issue with the loan program is that I don't see how under the CARES Act, the 1.25 billion, that it functions, especially as a 10-year program. So when these funds have a hard stop that they have to be expended by 12/30, loaning the funds does not constitute an expenditure. The forgiveness of a loan would. So in my understanding, and I know we're all sorting through a lot of federal regulations, so I certainly hope maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Unless you're making a loan and then forgiving it by 12/30, you have not expended those funds. And then we're in a world of hurt come 12/30 when we have pushed out these money as loans, and that doesn't count as an expenditure. So that's sort of the biggest roadblock I'm having in my mind with a loan program. Is the structure. I'm not sure that I love the idea in theory. I don't know that it works structurally with these funds. Speaking a little bit more about some of the other concerns that have been brought up, I think bandwidth amongst both the Business Council and banks is going to be an issue. Our banks have been absolute rock stars with the PPP program. They have made over $1 billion worth of loans. And in response to a question, a little bit more detail, how much PPP money has gone out. The first tranche of money was 7,600 loans, $837 million. The second tranche of money, and now this was only through the 1st of May, and the feds have not released updated money or numbers. But the second tranche of money, Wyoming banks have made another 4,200 loans for another 195 million. So that puts us at over $1 billion. So I know our small banks will continue to try to do what is right and continue to be as helpful as possible. What's happening now, though, is they are up to their eyeballs in the back end administration of these PPP loans. The forgiveness the forgiveness portion of those loans is very, very muddy and complex from the federal government. And I just, you know, I'm going to let them speak for themselves, but I do think that's a concern that businesses may not be able to access that.
So, auditor, so concerns are great. What are solutions? If not the business council and our local banks, then who?
And that's, I mean, that's and I know I'm very acute that it doesn't help to come and sort of vomit problems without solutions, but I think that bandwidth problem is going to be an issue. However, I think if we had any idea of a number of loans that would be contemplated, that we may have a better thermometer as to whether that would be an issue or not.
You know,
Now,
auditor,
I
think one of the things we have to do though is get programs in place. We'll have the opportunity to tweak these later. I mean, remember, we are doing this as our first one-day special session, try to stand up programs. We'll have the opportunity to adjust them later. I'm concerned that we were to study or work this for a month, we'd be just that much further behind. So that's why I say, I mean, these are legitimate and great points. Just without solutions, what do we do? And yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think, and I will express a little bit of opinion here, but I think the grant program is very attractive from a money in the hands of businesses who need it sooner. A few more quick points. The bill contemplates collateral, and I think that will be challenging for both businesses and the lender, whoever that may be. I wanted to touch on that. And then something that has just been echoed, and not so much from me, I'm just sort of the mouthpiece here from all of the businesses that we've spoken with, is there's a very, very low interest in taking on additional debt. Particularly a lot of folks in our restaurant industry, they're operating on such thin margins. And I know this loan contemplates being forgivable, but that may not help if you're not sure you're going to exist or not. So I just wanted to express that from what I'm hearing, there's just not a lot of appetite to take on additional debt. I think that's why the first round of SBA loans, the EIDL, the economic injury disaster loans, there wasn't that many of those that went out in Wyoming because folks are just hesitant in this environment to take on more debt, even if it is very, very low cost. Rounding out really quickly, and I apologize for taking up so much time, I did want to make a pitch. The PPP program was available to nonprofits as well. And I would advocate that you at least consider including Wyoming nonprofits in this framework. They employ, and this isn't precisely up to date, but they're somewhere between 13 and 14,000 Wyomingites that are employed by the nonprofit sector. And I certainly don't have to, I know I'm preaching to the choir. You all know how much they have been impacted. Now, some of those frontline nonprofits are getting federal help from other programs, but many others are not, and they do provide a really robust influx of our economy and as employers. So I wanted to pitch that. So Section 4 that contemplates the reimbursement of expenses to businesses, direct COVID-related costs. Everyone I've talked to loves it. Everybody thinks it's a great idea. So I would speak in favor of that on behalf of the task force. To finish up with my big thought around this, I know this is something that you're all struggling with, and it's something that I am struggling with as well, is the timeline around this federal money does not allow us to operate with the kind of precision that we like to. And I think that's a little bit of the rub for me. And I know that the legislature as a whole is very, very mindful in our partnerships with with private businesses to make sure they have skin in the game and to make sure it's equitable. And that's certainly what we all want to do. I know it's what you all want. But at this point, we need we need to get this money out the door to the businesses that need it. And we just stand ready to help in whatever way we can. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sorry I took up so much time.
No,
but the thoughts I wanted to share.
no, you didn't take up too much time. We appreciate your comments. Committee, any questions for our auditor? Okay. So I want to just touch on one point, and really a little bit, you know, I agree. The loan issue is it's a loan / grant, a non-recourse loan. It is a path forward through, as you called it, a robust discussion regarding the constitutionality and the use of these CARE funds, which are currently held in possession by the state of Wyoming, which creates that issue. And so one of the concepts with that loan, even though it's a little more cumbersome, is that they're non-recourse. Okay, the collateral is going to be taken will be much like in the economic disaster loans, which are probably going to be receivables existing, and probably not be very good collateral at the end of the day. It'll be burned through and won't affect their ability to keep their lines of credit moving forward. But one of the things is that then it has a tie with an economic purpose in that business is alive and working and paying taxes and keeping people employed. I just finished administering through a cooperative. There's $265 million through the WIP Plus program that went out to growers in Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, Minnesota, and Colorado, Nebraska. And so what happened, those were federal grants that were pushed through, so we didn't have the state owning them. But the federal government required what they deemed linkage requirements, which means it was 2 or 3 years of compliance within their programs that we have to track. And most federal grants that you'll see always have those types of requirements. So there's a little benefit. I realize moving quickly is very important, but we also don't want to just stand around with a bag of money and hand it out. We want to see it go to our businesses that will be open in 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, hopefully, for the life of that business. So just keep those thoughts in mind. Never had a chance to participate with your task force, so I'm just kind of sharing those thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. So committee, so we got through, do we want to take a quick, what we deem in the sugar industry business, a bio break for a few minutes? Does that seem to be okay? Okay, so before we go on the break, what I thought I would do is interesting. It was easy to get the auditor in order, okay? But what I thought I would do is we had quite a few people come in support of the legislation, one in opposition, and then several that were other. So what I think we'll do is we'll take the other next. So just so people know, after we return from our break, we'll talk to, we got Cindy Delancey, Scott Meyer, Brittany Wallachek, Wyoming Nonprofit. I might have said that name incorrectly. And then Dave Tubiner, he's Warehouse 21. So I think that's the order we'll take the folks when we come back. I have 2:35. How does 2:45? 10 minutes? Does that work for everybody? Okay, we'll do that. So just go ahead and stop your video and then we'll come back in. So, okay. Thank you, Auditor. We appreciate it. So Don, I like your virtual screen, your virtual background.
Sorry, I was muted. I'll have to get used to this someday.
Yeah. Now we're still streaming, so don't say anything about your wife or anything bad.
No, no,
All right.
no. That's just a small portion of the jungle.
All right. I'm not certain how we. I think Brian Fuller, will you let us know when we're ready to go, or will you just drop Cindy Delancey into the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, we are ready to go.
Okay, we'll wait. I know we'll get Chairman Anderson back and a few more members, and then we'll go. And okay. Yeah, so we got most of everybody. We're missing one House member. So, yeah, let's go ahead. Ms. Delancey, go ahead. You're first up on public comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the Minerals Committee. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. And I also want to say that the Business Alliance has been trying as hard as we can to offer resources during this time of crisis and trying to really assess the needs of businesses. As we all know, our business landscape in Wyoming is very wide and very diverse. And I want to applaud you all, particularly your chairman, on trying to get a draft one in the hopper to get a program on the ground. Is it perfect? Probably not. Will it ever be perfect? No. As we all know, we're in a time right now that there are no right or wrong answers. We're really shooting from the hip here. We've heard the governor speak many times about building an airplane in flight. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing as this program gets stood up. So conceptually, absolutely, thank you. Any relief that you can give to businesses right now in Wyoming is broadly supported by our membership. And I just wanted to offer a couple comments, particularly in light to some of the discussions that's been had already. With the risk of being duplicative, I will try to keep my comments limited. Auditor Racinas covered quite a bit of some of the points that I wanted to make. So I stand in echo of many of the things that she said. I've had the privilege of serving on the statewide task force under her leadership and Director Durrell's leadership. They've done a terrific job with the group, and again, want to extend my thanks. Okay, first things first. As far as the comment of trying to build, an application process similar to the PPP, in theory, I think that's great. But if we think about one of the intentions of this legislation is to try to capture those that maybe might have been left behind by the PPP. So I just ask us to use caution as far as adopting a PPP type model, knowing that that's one of the goals intended by this legislation is to try to capture those folks that were excluded or omitted by the PPP for a variety of different reasons. So that was kind of something that jumped out. I appreciate the ease and convenience of the quick PPP process. And Auditor Racinas is correct. For many small businesses, filling out a W-9 appropriately can be a challenge and a struggle. So having resources available for people that might try to take advantage of whatever this program ultimately ends up looking like might be something as we look to the Business Council or other sources of help to make sure that the targeted individuals that this program is designed to benefit are actually able to take advantage of it. The next one that I wanted to just offer some comment on is that flexibility as far as I also concur with maybe not having a bright line rule for that first category of individuals that you have not received federal funds and you've been impacted by closure. Perhaps, has already been discussed, maybe there's some kind of middle ground there that if you received a certain dollar amount of federal funds, you would be eligible still for this program. Because there could be a scenario where an individual has maybe received a $1,000 advance under the EIDL program, which would, help a little bit, but the intention of this program is, I think, to go a little bit farther than that, which in the way that it's currently written would be exclusionary. The other comment that I wanted to give too is, and again, I know this is draft, but I really would like maybe for myself a little bit more clarity in the definition of required closure. Because as we think about how this situation has unfolded and the wonderful leadership from Governor Gordon, there were only really very specific industries that were kind of ordered closed. What most businesses were asked to do was to stay home, to voluntarily take steps to limit the public. Yes, there's been some gathering restrictions in place, but I think that if there was a way to maybe ensure that we don't leave anyone inadvertently behind, that maybe wasn't a barber or a gym or a daycare, to ensure that we make sure that we have, folks covered who voluntarily closed their doors and did the right thing by keeping the public safe. So I know that we, go ahead.
Just sorry, Cindy. With like on page 8, line 6, we say that required closure shall also include the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any closure. That's the attempt there, is to keep that broad.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I certainly agree. But I think too, that we then can potentially get ourselves in a situation of, a subjective decision within an agency of, what is normal business and what amounts an interruption. So I'm not throwing that out there to be critical of anyone's drafting or work, just conceptually as these ideas continue to flow. Just really would love to make sure that we're trying to, reward and include those that voluntarily did the right things in Wyoming, like we were able to do to avoid that statewide closure. So just a piece for food for thought. The other comment as far as the language that I wanted to talk about as well jumps to section 4, where we have this idea about the stipend for expenses incurred in Wyoming. If there might be some clarity through rule or something there, is that like incurred meaning paid by the home office that has to be in Wyoming, or utilized in a business in Wyoming? It just would be a shame to limit that when we might have folks that have their home office in another location where the bills come to, and again, what that definition of incurred could potentially be construed to be. So jumping back to section 2, the grant component of this, like Senator Beitman, I too question, is this enough? I know there are steps that have been taken to give the governor some authority and flexibility, that if it's not, that there could be some ways to perhaps ramp up the amount of dollars in these categories for business relief. What we have to start somewhere. We have to be fast, we have to be nimble, but I think we also have to hear what the Business Council is telling us, that they have concerns about the resources that they have to effectively get this program pushed out as intended. And if we can help them by looking at section 3, as far as the loan component of this, I know there is a lot of, this feels really hard for us to just be giving grants to the public sector. Like, that's not something that we do under normal circumstances. But I think we just really have to push ourselves to realize that these are not normal circumstances. This is a situation that no one could have predicted, no one intended, and to have to push ourselves to realize the spirit and intent of the CARES Act is really impact driven, as opposed to maybe that kind of needs, like in a socioeconomic disadvantage type of program that we're used to with governmental fund allocations. This is in response to a national health emergency. So as we look at trying to figure out what to do with that second category of businesses, I think the auditor's correct that the solution could be the grant component. I know that there seems to be some conflicting opinions about whether that's permissible under the Wyoming Constitution, but for the ease of administration, I echo in wholeheartedly what Auditor Racino said, that most businesses are unwilling to take on additional debt right now. Absolutely unwilling, especially debt that's uncertain as to whether it can be forgiven or not. And the expertise to be able to administer these loans, either at the business council or the community bank level, again, just adds to that complexity of trying to come up with a solution, which leads us back to grant. I know, Mr. Chairman, you brought up before about as far as collateral and accounts receivable and maybe some other creative ways to secure some of these debts. But at this point in the pandemic, the harsh reality is that many businesses don't have accounts receivable that aren't already encumbered. They've been to their bankers, they've been trying to hang on as long as they can. And, just knowing that the options, that the walls are closing in a little bit for many. And so by, especially what perked my ears was hearing the auditor talk about the date component, that if these loans are, not essentially forgiven by the end of the year, that can cause some, complexities around whether or not the funds have been expended in a way that the CARES Act contemplates. So those were, just looking at my notes here a little bit as well.
We've got like 15 more people to testify.
Yep, I'm wrapping up. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you for your comments. Committee, any questions? Okay, well, thank you. We appreciate that. I've got listed next is Scott Meyer. This seems weird to me. I don't see who's on deck. I just got a list. All I can do is see the committee. See available, Brian?
He should be coming on momentarily, Mr. Chairman.
Looks like he's on there, just doesn't have his picture up.
Okay. I'm not touching any buttons on my side, so
That's so good.
Mr. Fuller do it.
That is so good.
Okay. There you are. Okay, Mr. Meyer, welcome. Please introduce yourself to the committee and record your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Anderson. Members of the committee, Scott Meyer here with the Wyoming Bankers Association. I won't belabor the points. I think that the comments that Auditor Racino as well as Ms. Delancey had made, we echo completely. I think I just want to address right now some of the questions or comments that were made earlier by other members of your committee. Primarily, let's talk a little bit about what the banks are not willing to do. And right now, I will tell you that your community banks are willing to do whatever they need to do to help. The reality is that the devil's always in the details. So with that being said, it all depends on where, what is being asked of them and how will they be able to get that accomplished with the help of either the business council or the legislature or whatever. The rulemaking will always be important to know how it's going to work, and it's those details that are most considerate for these guys and where they're coming from. With respect to, I'll just make a brief comment regarding the PPP. I know that you've already been told that how many loans have already been done, at least through May, and we're out at $1 billion. I just want to reiterate the fact that the PPP was designed for payroll protection. So at least 75% of that had to go to the employees, with 25% going to the businesses to help with things like rent and utilities. It really is irrelevant whether the business got $10,000 of PPP or got $100,000 of PPP, because the money that is there that is for the businesses is what is necessary to get them out of the hole they're in for being closed for 45 or 60 days or what have you, as well as trying to start back up again. And I'm considering more of our travel and tourism industry, whether it's hotels, restaurants. What we're hearing from our customers is that you have the social distancing, you have time to get people ramped up. You got to have customers that come into those businesses, you got to have employees to deal with those customers. It really becomes a chicken and egg kind of thing. When do I bring people back? When are the customers coming in? And how you deal with that. And these businesses are flat on their back. So they do need help getting things back up and running and getting things done with that. With respect to the loan issue, I will tell you that what we have found out in talking with our customers, the community bankers are now seeing for the first time now that it has been echoed before, and that is that these customers are not willing to go out on the line to borrow any more money. They simply cannot do that. They're flat on their backs. They're already thinking at this point in time, we may be able to get it through the summer months with some business, but it is not the main influx of customers for restaurants, hotels, and what have you that they would normally see during the summer. So that will be down considerably. So what you'll probably see now in Wyoming is, from what we're hearing from them, is a rash of bankruptcies that start about September and October. Therefore, I think that the issue really from the banker standpoint is you've got a lot of customers that are not willing to step out and borrow any more money at this point in time, whether it's money that could be forgiven later on, they're just not going to take that risk. So with that being said, I'll just open it up to any questions and see what I can do to answer those for you.
Okay, well, thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay, Mr.
Mr.
Meyer,
Chairman,
I've got,
question.
yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
I have a question that, I hear these talk of not wanting to borrow more money, that they may go bankrupt and everything. I don't see the connection there. If they're that close to it, borrow a little more money, and if you declare bankruptcy, it's just a little more that was in the bankruptcy. So I'm not seeing that would be a detriment to borrowing a little more money.
Chairman Greer, members of the committee, Chairman Anderson, to answer your question, the idea is, at least as I am understanding it, is that this money was trying to be made available to those small businesses to help them recoup that lost revenue from either being closed for those days or else from the slow startup that they're going to see over the next 60 days. If that comes in there, then you probably have avoided that bankruptcy. The idea of taking out an additional loan for any reason right now, they're over borrowed and they have no collection.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Okay. Well, good. Mr. Meyer, thank you for testifying. And yeah, so this was you officially first time in your new position, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it is. I got Mr. Giese not too far away, but yes.
All right. Well, we got some other stuff to talk about later this year, so we'll work you over then. Okay.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So next is Brittany with the Wyoming Nonprofit Organization. Within Dave with Warehouse 21 on deck, I guess. There's Brittany. Hey, welcome to the Minerals meeting. Please introduce yourself and Warehouse 21 on deck, I guess. There's Brittany. Hey, welcome to the Minerals meeting. Please introduce yourself. And okay. So Brittany, you need to do us a favor and mute the YouTube.
Thank you.
Okay.
Like, why am I hearing this echo?
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brittany Wallish. I'm the chairperson for the Wyoming Nonprofit Network here today representing that constituency. I'm not going to take a lot of your time because many of the points that our organization was hoping you would hear were already discussed earlier by Auditor Racinas. But I do want to reiterate the importance of the nonprofit sector to the state's economy, and also to make you aware that these organizations are also being pretty significantly impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Currently, we estimate that there are 14,000 people employed in Wyoming by the charitable nonprofit sector, and that sector is contributing in excess of $1 billion a year in expenditures to the state's economy. We know that these organizations are having to cut back some of their essential services, and of course, those programs are serving some of the most vulnerable populations in the state. So our ask of you when you're looking at this draft is that you revise, please, the definition of qualifying businesses under all 3 programs to include charitable nonprofits or those who are listed as 501c3s with the IRS. Currently, I think there's some concern that the current definition is not going to be significant enough in order to include these organizations in the bill's relief programs. We also have some concern about the language for independently owned and operated. I'm sure, as you know, these organizations don't really have any kind of singular owner as they're governed by boards of directors. So we would ask that if you're trying to avoid large corporations or publicly traded companies in here, that you use exclusion language at this point in the bill. Not to belabor the point because you've heard it already a couple of times, but again, we would also like to ask that you remove the exclusion for organizations that did receive a Paycheck Protection Program loan under the business interruption stipend. And then lastly, under your coronavirus mitigation stipend program, we would like to ask that you consider including language to include costs for contact tracing, and also consider the costs that we've incurred, that all businesses have incurred in terms of providing for technology adaptations in order for people to work from home or work remotely during this time. And I think that is all we have for the nonprofit network, and I would take any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay. Brittany, thank you for your testimony. So, Chairman Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, how many nonprofits are there that you represent in Wyoming?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I do know it's like more than 200 just for our organization. And certainly we don't have every charitable nonprofit in the state represented there, but we do have several hundred just under the umbrella of the network. But I'm sorry, I don't know the exact membership number.
Okay. Committee, any further questions? Okay, well, again, thank you for your testimony and getting signed up in the system. It seems to be working pretty well, so we appreciate it. Okay, so then we got Dave from Warehouse 21 is next. And we have our Senate contingent back. Welcome back.
Happy to be here, Mr. Chairman.
You're the only one, Senator. Not true. I'm always happy to be doing the people's work. Okay. Brian, the lag is just enough, it always makes me wonder. There we go. Okay. Sir, please introduce yourself to the committee and we'll hear your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I sure appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all and the work that's been done already on the bill and this opportunity. So I'm gonna just kind of talk through some points. My name is Dave Tubner. I'm the CEO and owner of Warehouse 21, which is a marketing and event firm located in the west edge of downtown Cheyenne, Wyoming. We have about 20 employees, full benefits, retirement, profit share. We're a global company. We execute and manufacture, design, manufacture large trade show booth systems and execute on behalf of clients like Lenovo and Flanders. And most of our clients that are executing events aren't a Wyoming client, and the shows don't happen in Wyoming, largely around the world, and Vegas is a big port. We have, like I mentioned, we have 20 employees. We in this first wave of the virus kind of setback, we had 10 of our events, global events, canceled already. And we have the potential to lose 10 to 15 more as the virus and the states that are looking to reopen themselves all are, from everything I've looked at, launching, reopening and relaunching with a 4 to 5 step reintegration plan, and most of them aren't showing until 4 or 5 phase any gatherings of humans of over 50 people or more. And some of the contingency language is also goes on to state that that wouldn't even be a viable phase until there's a vaccine. So that, for us, that we're monitoring it very closely, a lot of our events that have the potential to have canceled already have been slid to the fall. But with that kind of prolonged news and a slow phase back in program, those shows are very likely to be canceled in the fall as well. Places like Vegas and Amsterdam and all over the world have slower phase out programs. So we did receive the federal payroll protection program. And so I'm just going to talk just real briefly, program number 1, that business interruption program. I'm in full support of taking care of those businesses that didn't receive that federal funding. A lot of our small businesses and restaurants and retail and all kinds of businesses didn't get in on that, so I fully support that. But I did want to say that the program, and we received it, it was a huge help, but as mentioned earlier, it only covered payroll and facilities and utilities. And so it's not replacement of income in any way, but it did allow us to hold on to our employees, and was a huge thing for us. So we're deeply, deeply grateful for that. But I would encourage you to consider not excluding businesses, or if money remains in that, but in that budget, to consider those of us that did receive the federal program. And just to give you some perspective, our company received $400,000 because that's the cost every 2 months for payroll and utilities and facilities for a company like ours. So I don't know that the dollar amount of what you received, it's all in perspective to what your operating expenses are. So program number 2, the $100,000 loan forgiveness. It pains me to say this because it's never, as an entrepreneur, never thought I would be providing testimony and asking for a grant. Always kind of the opposite. Felt like I wanted in life to make a contribution to the tax base, not ask for it. But the comments that were made earlier about not wanting to take on more debt, or quite frankly, not possible to take on more debt, is very, very real. And $100,000 as a dollar amount, like I said, our payroll and utilities and facilities are $200,000 every month. So the idea of going for $100,000 when it looks like events for us could get canceled through the entire year, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful gesture for many companies, but ours, it's keep us alive even for another month after the end of June with the federal program when it runs out. So I'd consider maybe thinking about that dollar amount, the limit amount, and making it a grant, quite frankly. The debt, the ongoing debt, and those kind of things will make a lot of us not able to qualify. And bankruptcy, and when you do file bankruptcy, the amount of debt you take to bankruptcy does matter. It does matter in what you lose, not just as a business, but as an individual, and whether you end up homeless, quite frankly. I would ask you to consider that. The program about extra cleaning and those kind of things, I'm not sure about, and I don't think our company will qualify or benefit from those. We moved to remote execution of our advertising side of our company rapidly, and so we're executing well from that standpoint, and keeping people safe. But I know less about that program. Lastly, I wanted to say that I encourage you to take banks in any way possible in this. Their businesses too, and they've honestly been amazing. The federal program, and we bank with Jonah Bank, the speed and the quality and the care that they moved was game changing. We wouldn't be still open had we not qualified for that program and their submission with us. So, and speed is super key. End of June, that Fed dollars run, and we're facing through the end of the year, and I think many businesses are. So just wanted you to consider all of those things and deepful for your work.
Senator Anderson has a question for you. Yeah, Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How many employees did you say you had in Wyoming, and do you have employees in other areas like you mentioned?
We're 100% in Wyoming, all of our employees, and we have 20 of them. We had bought a event company in Alabama a few years back, 2012, but we moved all the jobs and the operation here. In fact, behind me, I put up our new building. Timing in life isn't proving to be great to build a new manufacturing center for a global event firm. And that was about a $3 million investment that we completed last year because we were having great success in expanding into some of these larger companies and global markets. But the timing of it is bad. But we're all in downtown Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Mr. Tubner, thank you. We appreciate your comments and appreciate you being in Wyoming and your entrepreneurship and all your comments. Committee, does anyone have any questions for Mr. Tubner? I think we understand his concerns. Yeah, Representative Henderson. He's not a constituent, is he?
Yes, sir. Well, we're a small town state.
Yeah.
We're all, well, thank you, Dave, for everything you're doing. But just would you be willing to share with us, looking at your cash flow requirements through the end of the year, for example, what would we need to be considering to make this a meaningful proposition? Make the business case for you in terms of signing on to something here.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's a hard one to answer because we're scrambling to try and do other work as fast as we can, and we've held on to all the people, so we're trying to make the turn. But to give you some perspective, we're about a $5 million company a year, and 45% roughly of our annual income is event. So you're talking about $2 million of lost revenue and payroll monthly around 200,000. So, it's we're probably one of those tougher companies that are positioned in an event firm, and we'll have to restructure even if we were to benefit from a grant or something like that was inclusive of 500,000 and it was totally forgiven. We're still facing real restructure and whether we can cross that bridge or not, even with it. So.
Okay. All right, well, Mr. Tubner, we have several more people to testify, and we do want to work the bill and take in everybody's consideration. Again,
yes, sir.
No, we appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate the testimony. Appreciate your work for the state. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys very much. So,
so Brian, I know he's speaking off somewhere. Next on my list I have is Terry Watson from Knowles. Okay. Ms. Watson, welcome to the Minerals Committee. Please state your name, who you represent, and your testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my name is Terry Watson. I'm the president of the National Outdoor Leadership, or NOLS, in Lander, Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of the committee, thank you for your efforts to help Wyoming and our communities cope with the coronavirus pandemic, and for your consideration of the gravity of the National Outdoor Leadership School's current situation. Be really honest, even as a military veteran that served in hostile theaters and a person with multi-generational roots, I'm pretty nervous providing public testimony. So thanks for having me. Bottom line, without your support, our role as a Wyoming institution driving economic activity in the state is in jeopardy. One of the top priorities expressed by the governor was to help folks that fell through the cracks of the CARES Act, those that didn't qualify for the PPP and other efforts. And that's us. We're too big to be a small business, and we're too small to have big business reserves. Knowles is a 501c3 nonprofit founded in Lander in 1965, and we seek to be the leading source and teacher of wilderness skills and leadership. Normally, we bring in about $40 million in revenue, and that in Lander alone, we pay $5 million into the local economy with nearly 170 local employees. We pay an additional $6 million to the instructors who teach our students, and many of those also call Lander home. Beyond this, there are the millions of economic benefit that staff, students, and families provide as they live in Lander or explore Wyoming, coming to and from their Knowles experience. As our Vice Mayor noted in the Casper Star Tribune article on April 9th, for over 55 years, we've brought a lot of talented young people into the state, and they stay and raise families and start small businesses, serve in public office, send kids to our schools. And we actually find that 2,000 alumni and former employees list Lander, Wyoming as their permanent address. I share all the above because Knowles' financial engine in Wyoming is in grave danger. We've canceled all of the approximately 750 programs through June 30th due to COVID-19 restrictions and limitations. Over 500 instructors have lost work, and we issued full or prorated refunds to students whose courses canceled. We earn 90% of that $40 million from running these programs. And as a nonprofit, we put 99% of that money right back into the business in terms of salaries and purchases of supplies and service. So without this revenue coming in, we're in pretty dire financial straits. We spent weeks looking at every form of financial relief and found none. And we were forced to lay off 60% of our support and headquarters staff April 8th. At our Wyoming-based educational locations, by far our largest program, we lost 85% of our staff. We've done our utmost to take care of our employees because they're our most important asset. We had a 2-week emergency sick leave policy that we added to our existing PTO structure. We voluntarily compensated at-will employees for canceled work agreements. We freed up funds by reducing executive salaries by 20%. I cut my own salary by 50%. We are giving 2 weeks separation pay for employees that we lay off to try to bridge them to the unemployment monies they're due. And all these efforts have been paid for out of operating reserves because we have no income that we've built up over the decades in the event of a rainy day. And as we say around the office, we're now in a deluge. It's more than raining. Knowles needs to be included in this program if we're to retain our remaining staff, rehire once situations allow us to teach, and continue to be a key driver of economic activity in Lander and in Wyoming. Knowles has fallen through the cracks of the hastily written CARES Act. We have been unable to access relief for any of the SBA programs, including the Paycheck Protection Program, because of how employees are counted. Our aggregate number of W-2s issued, which is 1,100, is misleading. Many of our seasonal and instructional staff work for as little as 2 to 5 days per calendar year, but we still call them employees. The true full-time equivalent for all Knowles employees was 362 and 219. That's well below that threshold of 500 employees, but the technicality of what constitutes an employee has prevented us from qualifying for any of the small business assistance. So we do have concerns with the bill as written because it offers no assistance to a business like us. We think we're really important in the local economy. We're stridently behind supporting all of Wyoming's businesses, but are concerned that this bill in its current form does give additional relief to those already included in federal legislation. The overall plan we love, but it's missing key aspects of helping businesses and tourism and recreation that don't have another source of assistance. So either now or in future buckets, we really ask for assistance and to be considered. We urge you to take steps to help Knowles access relief. Tourism and recreation is Wyoming's #2 industry, and we've been identified in the state's plan as having strategic importance in diversifying Wyoming's economy. Investing in robust tourism and outdoor rec economy supports Wyoming values of resilience and economic diversification. We are grateful for the work you do to support Wyoming's communities. As Fremont County's 4th largest employer, we provide benefits that ripple through the state, and the troubles have been felt especially hard here at home. Local elected officials have voiced concerns to media outlets around lost talent and tax revenue that Knowles' situation poses. And we would love to celebrate the success of your efforts to support Wyoming jobs and taxpayers and bring back Knowles as an economic engine for Lander and Wyoming. Thank you for your time and letting me present this testimony. And do you have any questions?
Ms. Wilson, I very much appreciate your testimony. Committee, any questions? Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm curious about is really what the specific needs are that would sustain Knowles without, serious damage. I understand your concerns with the PPP, and I understand your concerns with how we've structured what we have, but I don't necessarily know what would work. So I'm asking what it would take.
Something that looks a lot like the PPP would help us a tremendous amount. Right now, with cuts and cutbacks, our budget is 80%-ish payroll. And we're looking at the eventuality of needing to shed more jobs. So payroll support so that we maintain the core integrity of our business function is the heart of what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, committee, any further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so the payroll would be what you'd be looking for, and how many dollars do you think we should be thinking about for that to help you some way?
So we have reduced our payroll from about $3 million a month down to right now $500,000 a month. And if we could find payroll support for 4 to 6 months at $400,000 a month, that would be, I think that would take us to the other side right there. We're looking for alternate ways to bring in revenue. We're not just sitting around going, oh no. But yeah, payroll support for that 4 to 6 month period would make a big difference. And since our number is smaller now, that's not a huge amount of money. I'd have to do the math. Thank you.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Chairman Greer. I guess one of the questions that I would have would be, moving forward, would you consider changing the status of your company insofar as, there are other companies who do something very similar to you. They take people for trips or recreation or whatever, but they've been paying federal income tax for years and years, and now these PPP funds are coming basically from people's income tax that they have paid. Moving forward, it just seems like there should be a quid pro quo, some kind of a repayment if you're going to receive some form of aid at this point. Thank you.
It's a great observation. The nonprofit status does give us the benefit of being able to accept charitable donations, but in terms of examining alternatives going forward, we'd certainly be open to consider anything. It's a worthwhile suggestion, sir.
Okay, committee. So I'll echo a few of the initial comments is that this is our first step to be a quick strike. We are looking at a special session to get some of the CARES Act funds out into the state. We will be taking up other issues of bigger companies, bigger corporations, bigger issues as we move through this year. I know that doesn't help immediately, but we are not done discussing businesses in Wyoming. So just be aware of that is all I'm saying.
I appreciate that, Chairman. And I do believe you are looking out for the whole of Wyoming.
We're trying our best. We're trying our best.
You have a hard job. I will grant you that. I appreciate all the time and effort. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it. Okay. So Brian, next on our list is Lori Urbakite. So I think for the rest of the speakers we have got Lori Urbakite, Travis Detai, Jody Levin, Lisa Miller, Chris Brown, and then Colby Cox. And again, these are all in support of the bill. I'll ask everyone, everybody on here, but Colby is sort of experienced in front of the Minerals Committee. Just ask to be brief so we can move quickly and have an opportunity for the committee to work this bill. So Lori is up.
There we go. Am I on? Oh, I know. We have to show the video. There, whoops. Okay, there I am live.
There you are. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm representing two of our clients today, rather diverse clients, Wyoming Horse Racing LLC and the Wyoming Funeral Directors Association. We had.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Pardon me?
Right? There's a punchline to a joke in there.
I know there should be, shouldn't there? But there's not today.
Okay.
So we went through the bill carefully, and we came up with 4 amendments that we think would make a lot of sense for these two clients. And I do believe it would address some of the issues that other people have mentioned. Our first one was, of course, excuse me, that we want to clarify that these programs are not just for businesses that were forced to close, i.e. the salons, the bars, the restaurants. Wyoming Horse Racing, for instance, has several off-track betting parlors throughout the state. Some of those are located in bars, and so yes, they were forced to close in those areas. They do have some that are standalone operations, but because of the 10-person limit, there was no way they could stay open and make a profit. So they indeed did have to close, but it wasn't a forced closure. So if you have my proposed amendment, we believe that on page 8, line 7, after closures, if you insert or public health orders, that would clarify that those people that couldn't keep working, I mean, they couldn't stay open, or else their income was drastically reduced because of a public health order, not necessarily a closure. And we suggest that on page 13 as well. And then on page 16, we talk that one is about the taxes and the repayment. The Wyoming horse racing industry, the pari-mutuel permittees pay millions of dollars to the state of Wyoming. Some of that money goes back to the cities and counties. Some of it goes to the LSO now. Some of it goes to the Gaming Commission to support their work. So is that a tax? We feel it is. We feel it is definitely a tax of about 25% actually. So we would want to clarify that those statutorily imposed fees would also be included, or would be, and maybe you have to define taxes as those statutorily imposed fees on local businesses. And then that would that'd make that loan program much more attractive to the horse racing industry folks. And then finally on page 19, line 1, and this one is specifically for our funeral home directors, because they became aware of this pandemic early, much earlier than just March 1st, when it started hitting in Italy, they were instructed by their national organization and by some health officials that they should be planning for a massive fatality. And in doing that, they had quite a bit of additional expense in equipment and in materials, in chemicals, things that they went ahead and purchased in order to be prepared if this was as bad as it has happened in other areas. So that we feel that language in that section speaks mainly to the protection of employees, but they had those expenses for the protection of the public health as well. And so we'd like to add that language if possible, that include and expenses of Wyoming employers incurred in compliance with public health guidance. Again, they're one of those industries that, I mean, they couldn't close. I mean, they couldn't. So they're still open, but they had their revenues have been decreased substantially. I know you received, we sent through LSO, and I believe Sherilyn Kaiser sent you a direct email with a statement from the funeral directors and the costs that they've incurred. So there's small businesses that, you know, I mean, we have to have them, let's face it, we need them. And for them to take the hits that they are, it's going to be hard for some of them, especially the smaller ones, to stay upright and in business. So we'd appreciate those considerations. The Wyoming horse racing, of course, we have live meets that were scheduled to start June 12th. We have no idea if that's going to happen or not, with their OTBs being closed for the last 6 weeks. they're short a lot of income that was used to put on those live meets. And I believe I sent you information specific to that as well. But this loan program, if it could get up and running quick enough, that could be absolutely the saving grace for the horse racing industry. Those are my comments for now, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you. Committee, any questions for Lori? Yeah, Representative Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Urbikite, we've had some testimony on nobody else looks to be willing to accept anymore, take on a loan or anything. So you're saying the folks in horse racing don't see that as an issue, or?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Well, if you include the amount that if taxes can include the amount that they pay to the state of Wyoming, the whole thing would be forgiven. So that's why, obviously, to them, it would be a grant. And it also would, benefit cities and towns as soon as we can get them up and running again and get some of those taxes flowing back to the cities and counties. That's important. The one thing I didn't mention was our concern for the actual horsemen. We have 200 to 300 Wyoming bred horses that should be running this year in our live meets. And they have paid approximately $10,000 in their training and the cost to get their horses ready for these live meets. And if those meets don't occur, then they have no way to access the All Bred Fund, which is how they literally pay that plus the purses, how they pay for their expenses that they've incurred for the year. So I don't represent the horsemen technically, so I'm not speaking on their behalf, but I would certainly hope that we would bear in mind that these are just individuals that have spent a lot of money preparing for the live horse racing season. And that industry is a $62 million industry in Wyoming. And we would hope that somewhere along the line, we can work on figuring out how they can be made whole or how we can best help them as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Lori. Appreciate it. Okay, no more questions. All right, we're good. Then Mr. Detai with Jody Levin on deck.
Looks just like Travis.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can. Yes, there you are. Welcome, Mr. Detai.
All right. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I will try to be as brief as I can. A lot of the points that I was going to hit on have already been hit as well. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Travis Detai with the Wyoming Mining Association. First and foremost, in support of the bill fully, we recognize there are some priorities that have to come when you look to spend some of these funds. And those priorities, first in line, need to be getting those small businesses on the streets, Main Street back up and running. And so we are very supportive of Section 2 and Section 3 of the bill. What I will speak to from my membership is Section 4 of the bill, the Coronavirus Mitigation Stipend Program, which is basically this is an employee safety measure. When you look at what companies have done to mitigate the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. And I will say this, from my membership, which I represent 27 mining companies, as well as about 100 service and supply companies that support the mines and provide those equipment and other services to the mines. We have been fortunate for the majority of my membership that we've been able to stay up and operating so far. It has been a big push of ours to show that we are a critical industry and that we have to stay open. And we have been, but that has come with some costs, and those costs are associated. If we're going to stay open in a pandemic, we've got to protect our workforce, and we have done that almost across the board from my membership to varying degrees, implementing protocols and procedures to protect our employees, to provide the safest working environment that we possibly can in this. And those have varied, like I say, anything from visitor and vendor restrictions at the gate, temperature checks, We have staggered shifts so that people are not arriving at the same time so that we can maintain appropriate social distancing. A number of my operations have restricted gatherings of 10 or more, and of course, increased cleaning and personal protective equipment. And therein lies the real cost. So in surveying my members as to how much, actual expenditures that they have had in mitigating the coronavirus pandemic, they've been very varied and very varied across sectors. For instance, in the uranium sector, one of the questions that I asked was how much you have spent extra on personal protective equipment. And we had a uranium operator that actually had excess N95 masks that they donated to providers in Natrona County. So they don't have much of an issue with that. But then you go to the other side of some of the larger operators, and the cost for cleaning supplies and personal protective equipment alone for one mine since March 1st is approaching $214,000, and that's just to date. Speaking with one of my coal operators yesterday, he felt that the procedures for this particular mine were working, and they intended to keep them in place for the foreseeable future. And I think that's key right now, is we don't know when we're going to be out of this. And with $213,000 spent now, you're looking at operators, especially some of the larger ones, are going to be laying out significant money to keep up their cleaning supplies, to keep up their protective equipment supplies going forward into the near future, to the tune of roughly, for some of our larger Trona operators, an average of about $100,000 a month. So it's a big deal. One of the things that we've been doing at the association is trying to find sources for some of these materials, specifically masks. We've had some operators that have had some issues procuring masks for employees. We have one operation that we have just got some prices for out of the state of Montana, and this is just for the committee's information. The N95 masks, which are the best ones, I guess, that our operators prefer, a minimum order from this particular company, and it's not a fly-by-night company, it's an established company, a 50,000 minimum order of N95 masks at $3.48 a piece is $174,000. And that's just for an order of masks that may last 3 or 4 months, depending on how an operation uses their equipment. So the costs have been significant. And so we appreciate very much the bill and the opportunity to have some of those costs for mitigation of employee safety reimbursed. What I would, a couple of questions that I would pose to the committee as considering this is with the limitation of $200,000. Number one, as I'd kind of just refer to what Senator Beitman said earlier, we don't necessarily think that's going to be enough. We think that should be expanded and significantly, and the appropriation for this particular program, because large mining operations are not going to be the only ones that take advantage of this. Even my smaller operations, and just to give you kind of a little, just a variance of what people are spending. I mentioned the larger coal company, $213,000 for one mine of a company that operates 3 mines. So if a limitation of $200,000 is the cap, that's not going to cover one company's supply of cleaning supplies and protective equipment for 2 months, let alone an entire company, with 2 other mines functioning. On the other side, we have one mine that a smaller operation that has spent $35,000 on protective equipment and cleaning supplies so far. So the variation is large, but at the high end, it's going to get expensive for some of these companies to continue these safety protocols, and they're going to go forward for the immediate future. The bill cites 9 months worth of expenses. It's going to get expensive for some of these companies. So I would encourage the committee to maybe take a look at bumping those amounts in some cases significantly. And the second thing that I would say was that I would ask it, and maybe this is something that can be discussed, is the $200,000 as it stands right now, is that going to be a one-time cap so that a company has a one-time shot to get $200,000, or is the company going to get a chance to come back to the well, if you will, as these expenses increase? Because they are going to increase. And unfortunately, where we are right now, not knowing where we're going to wind up, is going to be that uncertainty is out there. And I know the committee understands that, and that this is just a starting point. And I think, Mr. Chairman, I will leave it right there, but we are fully supportive of the bill. We would like to see a bump up in the max on that for the mitigation stipend program, and perhaps a little larger appropriation, understanding that the governor should have the authority and the flexibility to dump more into it if we need it. And with that, I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Detail. Committee, any questions? Okay, I think you covered things nicely. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate your virtual background too.
Go Pokes.
All right. Okay, Jody Levin is next, and then Lisa Miller would be with Goshen County's on deck. Okay, Ms. Levin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be extremely brief because Mr. Detail covered quite a few of the comments. My name is Jody Levin. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Wyoming Trona industry. In full support of the bill, particularly the section number 4, where we deal with COVID-related business expenses. That's a significant expense that the Trona industry is incurring right now, as Mr. Detail indicated. It's about an average of $100,000 per company monthly right now. The Trona industry took quick steps early on, very early, into February, beginning of March, to make significant changes in their operations to ensure that they could still operate in a safe manner. So we do strongly appreciate that portion of the bill. We also understand the first things first notion that support needs to go to small business, Main Street business, those entities that had forced closures. Absolutely, support should go there first. As you work through this process and funds become available or opportunities become available for larger businesses, we would appreciate the opportunity for consideration of the Trona industry and those particular expenses related to safeguarding the workplace and the workforce.
Okay, well, thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay, that was easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And then next we have Lisa Miller with Goshen County Economic Development Corp. And then after that, Chris Brown. So committee, we got three more folks that are listed to testify.
Good afternoon. Can you see me?
We can. Please introduce yourself, who you represent, and welcome to the Minerals Committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and greetings, members of the committee. My name is Lisa Miller, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief Executive Officer.
So Lisa, could you mute your YouTube? Is that what you were going to say, Representative Duncan? Okay. There we go. But you have to unmute yourself. Okay, so yeah.
There, does that
There
help?
we go. You know, I'm not even going to call that a technical glitch. That was just a hiccup. All right. Okay.
Thank you. Let's start over.
Okay.
All right.
But you
Nope.
still.
I
We'll
apologize.
get the YouTube going.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Lisa.
Yeah, go ahead and help her.
You need to close out your YouTube window. So click
Okay.
the X.
Yeah, go ahead and help her.
You need to close out your YouTube window.
That 4-second delay is something else.
Okay, now if you can hear me, you need to unmute yourself. And now let's try.
Got it?
I apologize.
All right.
Okay.
We're all
Good
good.
now.
All right. Let's start from scratch.
Okay. We good now?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry for those problems, and greetings, members of the committee. My name is Lisa Miller, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief Executive Officer for Goshen County Economic Development. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. As Representative Duncan mentioned earlier, we have local economic development grants, better known as the Progress Program. These are made possible through quarter-cent sales tax for economic development, where the collected funds are used through what we call a Progress Program. These funds are 3 categories: community enhancement, capital matching, and infrastructure investment. Started in 2011, the overall goal of the Progress Program is to help our businesses succeed by making their properties more attractive to their customers and make our 5 communities more attractive to potential new businesses, employees, residents, and visitors. Since its inception, approximately $1.2 million has been awarded 244 times to our businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities. Applications are reviewed quarterly, awards are made within 30 days of the due date, and are paid on a reimbursement basis. In light of the COVID-19 crisis, however, our retail-related businesses throughout Goshen County were eligible to apply for what we called a Special Emergency Assistant Grant. In 2 weeks' time, from idea conception to approval by our Progress Program Committee and Board of Directors, Goshen County Economic Development awarded $26,500 in emergency assistant funds to 47 local small businesses. Applicants could apply for up to $1,000, and the funds were dispersed immediately. In Goshen County, where small business is big business, these grants are helping our local businesses who provide needed services to our residents and municipalities. Keeping it local is our #1 objective, as these businesses are the heart and soul of Goshen County. Goshen County is the only county currently to have the quarter-cent economic development sales tax that assists with grants like this. As a side note, our 4 local bank presidents serve on our board of directors. As a 501c6, we wholeheartedly support the COVID-19 Business Relief Program on behalf of our businesses, municipalities, and residents. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Any questions? Any questions for Lisa Miller? Yeah, Representative Duncan. Not a constituent, huh?
Yes.
All right. All right.
So I actually asked, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually asked Lisa to testify because I wanted her to get you guys to be able to ask detailed questions about our program, because my idea is that this is what the idea of our whole bill is about. Get the funds to the direction of the business council, then goes down to the local level. And the people like Goshen County's economic development then can actually, are boots on the ground, and there's not the bureaucracy where they also can track it. They can do reports and they can send it back to the business council, which can then send it back to us, or however it needs to be done. But I really want you guys to ask her questions and figure out, you know, the mechanics of it, because we've already done it. So I think that this is a great way to not reinvent the wheel. They already have an application and all that. And then I foresee, just ask her questions about it, because we already talked about it. So Ms. Miller, you and I talked, and you can see that this could work at the state level, correct?
Absolutely, Representative Duncan and Mr. Chairman. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of our businesses throughout the great state of Wyoming.
So I think Representative Duncan, as we talked with the Business Council, it'd be good for them to reach out, because as we outline this program, I think it'd be good for them to look at the nuts and bolts of however this program turns up looking. We still have a little bit more of the complication of when the state gives money to individuals in almost any form, you still have to go through that approved vendor process. And again, our current auditor's done a great job of getting that streamlined, but it still is a bit cumbersome. So, but I think this would be good for the Business Council to reach out to Goshen County and have the discussion with them. So, all right, committee, any questions? Lisa Miller, we appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you in the future and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Up next then, Chris Brown, and then Colby Cox with Roadhouse Brewing Company will be our last person to testify after Mr. Brown. Okay, Mr. Brown, welcome. You're on mute.
Excellent. Can you hear me now okay?
We sure can.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to see you all. Chris Brown, representing the Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association, the Wyoming Travel Industry Coalition, and the Wyoming Retail Association. Much of what I wish to say has already been said, so I will keep it brief, Mr. Chairman, but these are obviously disastrous times for many of the businesses that I represent across the state. A couple of quick points. We sincerely appreciate the committee's quick work with this bill, and we stand in full support of it. As has been said before, we hope that you will amend the section that mandates only businesses that had not received a PPP. A number of businesses that were able to take advantage of that program. That money is going to run out probably in the middle of June or so for some of the businesses that were able to get onto that earlier. And many of these businesses are going to have significant other expenses outside of payroll that they could use some assistance with. I think that if the committee so chose to prioritize small business that did not get PPP, but then allow businesses that did or that were able to receive that, we think that would be a favorable amendment. Grants versus loans, of course, we would prefer grants versus loans. But at that same time, I wouldn't want perfect to get in the way of very good. You mentioned earlier on at the beginning of this meeting that the idea was to get these funds available in a quick fashion. I think they're direly needed by business across the state. And so the sooner the better as far as moving this bill forward. One point that Ms. Urbakite mentioned that I just want to also re-underscore as well is the sentence that says required closure shall also include the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any closure. I want to make sure that that sentence is going to do what it intends to do. For example, lodging properties weren't ever forced to close. But certainly there's no visiting travelers going on right now. They're hurting bad right now too. Many small retailers were never forced to close, but there's not a lot of foot traffic visiting boutique shops, etc. So I don't know that sentence, maybe that sentence achieves all of those businesses being able to apply, maybe not, but it might be worth taking a look at to make sure it's inclusive. Finally, Mr. Chairman, that section 4 and being able to provide relief for PPE, et cetera, equipment and needed materials. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty in front of the industries that I represent moving forward. Even as we begin to slow roll open up, I don't anticipate that it's just going to be gangbusters and sales are just booming back in businesses. I have some anecdotal information from restaurants that have been opening in Montana that suggest that things are going okay, but it hasn't just been gangbusters and a return to full volume sales. Masks, additional gloves, additional cleaning, etc., education of staff, training. That's all going to be a significant expense moving forward for the businesses I represent during very uncertain times on how the next few months are going to look. So we appreciate all the work that this committee has put forward. We stand in support. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any questions? Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, just big terms. What's the overall impact to the industry from your perspective? Just quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson. I don't have specific data that I can share with you right now. It's anecdotal, but for the most part, restaurants are either closed or operating on a trickle of to-go sales and revenue coming in. Certainly, there are some restaurants that I've seen that have been more innovative than others that are doing better with it. But as an example, a friend of mine runs a business up in Casper that primarily, that had a huge to-go business established already. He said he's able to execute at about 40% of last year's sales. That is a business that already had a significant to-go service in place. And that is the very best case scenario. There are a number of restaurants that elected to just close down altogether because to-go wasn't enough to keep them afloat. Likewise, in lodging, I've heard best case scenario in maybe properties that are near a highway or that have business travelers, or industry staying with them, maybe 30% capacity. Again, in best case scenarios. This is anecdotal from calls that I've had around the state, but it is grim, Mr. Chairman and Representative.
Okay. Mr. Brown, this has been raised a couple of times, and I know in working with the draft, we were trying to get to businesses that were impacted, not as a direct result of the closure. And I think Ms. Urbikite had given us some sample language, which I wrote down. That would say required closures shall also include the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any closures or public health orders. Do you feel that qualifier would go in the right direction?
I think it probably would, Mr. Chairman, but I would need to give it a little bit more thought.
Okay.
Like as an example, our border was never closed. Would the 14-day quarantine for anybody coming in from out of state as a result of non-business travel be captured in that sentence? Probably, but I would want to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think what we're getting to is the public health orders, the 10 people gathering and all those other requirements. So the intent is to be inclusive. So, okay. Committee, any further? Yeah, Chairman Anderson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Chris, we've heard several times that the dollar amount isn't high enough. Is that 200,000 too low for your industry, or do you have some other input on that?
Mr. Chairman, I have had a few phone calls that suggested that maybe that number needed to be increased, but I need to do a little bit more due diligence in calling around. With the bill really only being out for about 24 hours now, I've had as many conversations as I can, but I'm going to continue to work it, over the next few days.
Okay. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just invite Mr. Brown to, again, it would be anecdotal, but with the heavy tourism that we rely on in the summertime and all of the events that have been canceled, for example, CNFR, we're going to see companies that maybe they were relying on providing stock for CNFR. That's not going to happen. And that was the one time that they were relying on to make their year. So just if you could touch on the future effects that we will be seeing in the next couple of months. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh boy. Yeah. So, I'm typically a pretty optimistic person, but I would say that, I'm concerned about the next few months. Some things I've heard from the industry is that, we can survive a terrible season. We can't survive a season that never happened. Do I think, am I optimistic as things start to get opened back up that businesses will be able to generate some revenue, that the public will feel confident traveling to some extent again? Yeah, I am optimistic about that. But with the cancellation of huge events, and Representative McGuire, your community is a perfect example. Cancellation of school sports in the spring is what kicked it off. A lot of those businesses direly rely on those sales. Same thing with CNFR. The whether or not Cheyenne Frontier Days is going to happen down here in Cheyenne or not is up in the air still. All of those are going to have a profound impact on the communities that they are in moving forward. It's going to take a long time to recover from this.
You know, I think just a little bit of a follow-up on this, and this kind of goes back, we keep referring back to Senator Beitman's first question, but it was a good one. You know, this is our first attempt to try to get some things out to our small businesses and our first attempt at relief. There's going to be other discussions and a lot of discussions. A lot of things that I have heard revolve around these events. And it may very well be the case that some of the money that's not being utilized right now may have to come back in a second round of bills, not in this bill, and have that discussion regarding events. I mean, you start to look at, we can go all around the state, you know, so you got the rodeo in Sheridan, my favorite. You get Cheyenne Frontier Days, you got Cody Stampede, you've got, it goes all around all of our, the business, or excuse me, all the communities we all represent. Those events are going to be a problem and probably something we need to address, but not, probably not going to be able to do so in this bill, but definitely be aware of them.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add on that for one moment, please. While we're talking about events, the Convention and Visitors Bureaus, destination marketing organizations are going to need help moving forward too. They are funded through lodging tax, which of course is barely trickling in right now. And those organizations play a critical role in promoting your communities and driving traffic around the state and getting visitors to your various communities. So please consider having them be a part of the discussion as we move forward as well, because it's going to be critically important.
Yeah, no, I think the discussion we'll continue to have. You bet. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, any other questions for Mr. Brown? Yeah, Senator Hanko.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, Chris, you know, you talk about, you know, support structures in place locally, but clearly the chambers of commerce are, you know, the drivers of a lot of that, you know, with what they do and how they expend their monies. Do you have any thoughts how maybe they could be benefited by some of the stuff we're talking about?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I know that I only loosely understand the program that our chamber here in Cheyenne propped up, and I believe is trying to get some funds out to local businesses as well, but I don't feel qualified to speak to that. Really, the wheelhouse that I operate in is really convention and visitors bureaus and destination marketing organizations that are tasked with promoting your communities and the events that are in your communities and making sure that as folks travel to Wyoming, that they understand that your communities are here, and these are good reasons why spending a night or two in Casper, Douglas, Sheridan, etc., are a good idea. Senator Coe, I can't necessarily speak on behalf of the chambers. I know that there's a very important role for them to play, and some of them are our members, but I'm hearing loudly from the Convention and Visitors Bureaus that they're really going to need some relief moving forward.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, committee. Thank you. Mr. Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Scheduled person for public comment. Brewing Company. Mr. Cox?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Please introduce yourself, and we're all ears.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Colby Cox. I own several businesses in Wyoming. I own a company called Convergence Investments, and we develop housing projects around the country in Texas, Delaware, Maryland, North Carolina, Florida. I also own Roadhouse Brewing Company and Roadhouse Pub and Eatery. We employ roughly 150 people, or at least we did prior to March 15th. All of my employees are Wyoming employees. All my companies are Wyoming companies. I just wanted to touch on, there were some questions from Chris Brown about some of the order of magnitude. And I wanted to speak specifically about kind of the brewery and the restaurant business. Just to give you an example, we had 113 employees prior to March 15th. And following kind of the public health orders that came out, we trimmed our staff down to 9 people. Our revenues went from $800,000 a month to $75,000 a month. So the impact has been pretty dramatic. And I think the fear that restaurants have is that the reopening plans that are being announced by many of the public health officers on the most aggressive level are talking about 50% occupancies for several months. Can we, I have a 300 seat restaurant in downtown Jackson Hole. Can I make money at 150 people? I have no idea, but we're going to try. I think a couple of areas that I just wanted to touch on, and I won't be redundant with anything that's been said. The PPP program, the reason why that has not worked very well for restaurants is because most of our employees are collecting unemployment now. With the federal CARES Act money that came through, they're getting an extra $600 a month. For me to hire that person back for a job that I can't give them because I'm forced to remain closed and pay them less money just simply doesn't work. So we were trying to get creative with that program in order to pay our rent and utilities and what have you, but the threshold to get the rent payments that you need through the PPP fund is that you have to hire back 75% of your staff. And you have to pay them 75% of what they're making, and you have to well, anyway, it's very difficult for a restaurant to make those numbers work when you can't open and give someone a job. So I think this bill that you're proposing will solve a tremendous amount of problems for restaurants that are dealing with the complications of the PPP program. There's a couple things I'd like to highlight that I think could really benefit many small businesses in Wyoming. The restriction on the number of employees. PPP consolidated businesses based on your employer identification number. So essentially, if you own 2 restaurants and those 2 restaurants are held by a common holding company, you had to apply for that loan through the common holding company. I'd like to suggest that you consider allowing businesses to apply through the individual entity level so that each restaurant could apply on its own separately. My brewery and my restaurant are 2 very different businesses. The brewery distributes in 4 states, and I've been able to keep that going. But I had to apply for both the brewery and the restaurant and apply the rules to both, and those are 2 different companies. So I'd ask you to think about segmenting based on LLC. The other thing I want to point out about PPP is it was really designed for W-2 wage earners. It did not take into consideration entrepreneurs that, and as you all probably know, in an LLC, you cannot receive a W-2 income or a salary if you're an owner. You get what's called a guaranteed distribution. That money was not allowed to be considered under PPP. So most owners that own LLCs in Wyoming haven't been able to pay themselves. I myself haven't received a paycheck since early March. Part of that was to help out our other employees, but part of it is because we didn't receive any funds for that. Section 3C, this is a pretty big one. It requires that this loan be primary to any other debt obligations. I just want to make sure that's going to be very difficult for businesses that currently have debt. If the Wyoming Business Council is going to require a subordination agreement that a bank is going to have to sign to put this loan in first position, I think that's going to be very difficult to achieve.
Let me
Yep.
You interrupt prior to other. This is the third parties to the business and third parties. And the reason that's language out of our economic disaster law. It's a law just to make sure you understand that.
Okay.
Meaning that law is subordinate to everything else in existence.
Okay. Chairman, you're breaking up on me. I don't know if that's happening with anyone else.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you're breaking up.
I don't know what to do about that. I have a very good internet, but next the area. So what I was saying is that language is for economic disaster loan program, and it's designed for their loans. But it's itself and parties. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, you're still breaking up, but what I believe I heard you say is that this loan, there will not be a subordination agreement required for this loan. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Section 3, numerat 6. I do want to comment that I don't believe $100,000 is enough money for many businesses in Wyoming. I believe that there's a simple formula that could be applied that takes into consideration what revenues were prior to the pandemic and what revenue loss has occurred since then. And that a number more in the range of 300,000 as a max loan amount. I've discussed this with other businesses, and I've discussed it with other representatives of the legislature as of today, actually. And I would encourage you to consider an increase from 100 to 300,000. I believe that there's been a lot of commentary about the idea of a grant versus a loan. I'm probably in the minority on this as a business owner, but I actually believe a loan program will work. I believe businesses, if they believe they can get the forgiveness through the sales tax credit, I believe that sales tax credit is a good idea to encourage businesses to reopen and try to generate sales tax. Because obviously the more sales tax you can generate, the more credit you can get against the debt. And, you know, if businesses truly believe that this debt will be forgiven through these credits over a 10-year period, I actually think that's a pretty smart idea. So, and then finally, I have some concerns about collateral for businesses in Wyoming, but it sounds like in some of the commentary I've heard from the members of this committee and from members of the public that the standards for collateral are going to be pretty loose. So that's it. I really appreciate your time. I just wanted to speak as a business in Wyoming that's got boots on the ground and some of what we're experiencing. I very much appreciate the work that you've done on this bill and moving very quickly and all the time you guys are putting into this. And I want to reiterate that I very much support what you're doing here. So thank you. And I'm here for any questions.
Yep, Chairman Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, on a question on that section 6, where the loans are, we move that from 100,000 to 300,000. It also says for each eligible business, would that be a multitude of your LLCs? Say you had 3 LLCs. Are you thinking each one would be able to get the 300,000, Mr. Cox?
I believe that should be allowed. In my particular case, that 300,000 would probably be an aggregate number between the two businesses. So there's a formula that said, okay, well, you've lost $400,000 worth of revenue for 3 months. Some percentage of that is how you come up with a formula of what you're allowed to apply for. So the answer is yes, I believe it should be at the LLC level. And I think 300,000 would encompass a lot of businesses in Wyoming, but I don't think you're going to see a lot of 300,000, a tremendous amount of $300,000 requests.
Okay. Mr. Cox, any other questions for Mr. Cox? We appreciate your testimony and going last. You had to wait all that time, but
no problem. It's so much fun listening to you all speak.
Well, and he said it with pretty much a straight face.
Kind of a jokester, isn't he?
Okay, Representative Crank.
I'm in the beer business.
Yeah. Representative Crank?
That was my comment, Mr. Cox. The beer business at last, was looking real good to start there. So thank you for your testimony.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And so Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Cox. He's one of those that turned around and changed and made, you're one of those that made some hand sanitizer, didn't you?
We've made hand sanitizer. We donated 11,000 masks to the hospital. We secured 1,000 infrared thermometers for the public health. We've really been trying to do a lot of work to help our community. So, and a lot of those masks went to the Indian reservations as well. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a shout out and thank you very much for in a horrible situation where all your businesses are shutting down and yet you still stepped up and contributed. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you. We all appreciate it. We all got to do our part. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, we'll close public testimony. I do want to make a comment. If there's anybody out there, there was a cutoff time to be able to sign up to testify. Senator Rothfuss, you probably saw this as I did. We received 2 more comments, but they rolled through the management council site. And I think you and I were the only 2 that got those.
Yeah, I think that's true.
One was a written comment requesting that we expand Medicaid, and another one was a comment, I think, talking about the same thing that we've heard, sort of a common theme on the first bucket, not being limited to just those who did not receive PPP. So
Correct.
if that person is listening, I apologize, they missed the cutoff by a few minutes. But they are scheduled to speak at Management Council tomorrow. So anyway, so committee, I know it's been a long afternoon. I think it's important that we work this bill. Would we like to take another bio break? And
I think a 5-minute break would be excellent, Mr. Chairman.
yeah, why don't let's look at let's go to a 7-minute break. Come back at 4:30. Brian, this be ready to work the bill. And I think we'll just work it by starting just right through at page 1 and this hit the amendments and do what this committee wants to do with it. And I promise I'll be as quiet as I possibly can stand to be. So, okay. All right. Hey, Brian Fuller, could we have you come on? There you go. We'll have you on the screen. That way we can see your body language as we propose amendments to see if you're keeping up or what your reaction is. That'll help us. So, I will say in terms of managing a meeting, having everybody in front of me is actually easier than down and off to the sides, but that's the only positive I'm seeing out of this. Okay, Senator Coe, who are we missing here? One, 12, we're missing a couple. We got Senator Coe, Representative Furphy, Representative Ayer. They're all shown to still be logged in, so we'll just give them just a minute. You know, Ryan, why don't we, let's let Josh Keefe in case we need to ask him any technical questions regarding administration. I think there's room on our screens for him.
And Mr. Chairman, he's admitted to the room. So hopefully he's still there.
Okay, yeah, I saw him before that we had him in the waiting room. Did he, when I said admit him, did he just jump off? Okay, no, he's right there. So he's in, okay. Josh, could you just verify you're there? If you don't want to use your camera, that's fine. Okay. Okay, so Representative Furphy's waiting to be in. Okay, he's in. Okay. I'm starting to be able to read this other screen and what it means. I'm kind of slow learner. So Representative Furphy, could you want to turn on your camera?
Yeah, it wouldn't let me turn it on. It said the host had turned me off and wouldn't let me turn it on.
Then, okay, and then Senator Coe, we got your microphone's on. Can you?
Oh, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Well, I can't. It says I cannot unmute because the host has you turned off. So turn me on, would you please?